The Mojave Outpost. Not counting Vegas itself, I'd argue this to be one of the most iconic points of interest to be found in the Mojave wasteland. If you play by the books, this is somewhere you'll probably head to very early on. It's where you can get one of the best early game weapons, the service rifle, the place where you can find potential companion Cass.
Nobody's dick's that long. Not even Long Dick Johnson, and he had a fucking long dick.
As well as being the place where you can really start to forward your relations with the NCR if you so choose to. Its most prominent feature, however, is definitely this statue, showcasing a recreation of that armor that is featured all throughout the game's iconography. And if you're anything like me, you want a beeline for that shit. This is the most dripped out a man has ever looked. The only thing that competes is like this guy. But regardless, even on an NCR playthrough, the Mojave Outpost isn't really a place you find yourself coming back to that often past the first hour or two of starting a new playthrough. It stands tall, and for what it is, it serves its purpose well. Like I said, it gives you a good introduction to the NCR, but also the rival faction, the Legion, when an NCR trooper asks you to investigate what the Roman LARPing femboys are doing in the town of Nipton. If you want to know, not so great stuff.
Who won the lottery? I did! Whoa!
We've talked about most, if not all, of the primary things the Mojave Outpost stands for when it comes to raw, surface-level gameplay purposes. But at the Outpost, there's always been this one really peculiar detail. The fence post that separates the Nevada branch of the New California Republic with the motherland itself. The Long 15 is an interesting case. Obviously, there's plenty of points on the New Vegas map that separate the playable map from the out of bounds, but most of it is either made up of mountain ranges or maybe a river or two. There's rarely any other place in this game that presents the unplayable aspect of the map with as much of a tantalizing presence as this gate. And it is absolutely a standout to most players who will arrive at the Mojave Outpost. Now, obviously, with hindsight, we were able to go slightly outside of this gate thanks to the Lonesome Road DLC, but only if you choose to nuke the NCR. Unless you do that, there is literally no way to access what's behind this gate, no way to see what the heart of the NCR actually looks like outside of small glimpses of an irradiated and nuked landscape that really just serves to fight a handful of tough enemies, the area being able to be entirely cleared in less than 20 minutes if you're a skilled player. But factor in that Lonesome Road was the last story DLC to release for New Vegas, and that players had to wait almost a year in between the release, then you remember that the people who played this game on launch had no idea what could even possibly lie behind these gates for almost an entire year. You can even still find really old discussions about this topic on archived game forums today. This wasn't just a piece of set dressing for a lot of players, but a direct spark of intrigue and curiosity for the player base at the time. People wanted to know what was behind those walls. People wanted to see the heart of the NCR. Of course, it is possible to glitch out of bounds and discover some stuff outside of it, but as expected, it's not much of anything other than sand and the occasional shrub or two. But that's our reality. A year ago now, a YouTube channel would surface around this idea. What is outside of the Mojave Outpost? An innocent call of curiosity on the surface, with a response far more nuanced, confusing, and disturbing that would face in this player's wake. A player who not only found cut content, but a player whose descent into the out of bounds would unravel something that was never meant to be seen. Discoveries that don't make rational sense, content far beyond what any player would ever wish to access, and a degrading descent into something possibly far, far beyond our comprehension. This is Dr. Bosch, the Fallout New Vegas player in hell. I I want to make this section of the video really quick because despite what you may believe, I do value your time and I don't want this video to be unnecessarily long just for the sake of it, but I do believe there's some groundwork to be laid out here because the elephant is way too big not to address this time. I don't really help myself when it comes to the Sagan Hawks comparisons, and I know that. He's one of the biggest inspirations for my channel, and I wear that on my sleeve. So believe me, I know how suspicious it looks for me, of all people, to be covering the same series as his fucking third most popular video ever. I know this, so I've never watched it. Fallout New Vegas is my favorite game of all time. I've beaten it at least 5 times during my tenure on this planet, and when I'm not playing Fallout New Vegas, I'm spending time watching Fallout New Vegas related videos, buying Fallout New Vegas related merch, attempting to manipulate every single person I know into playing Fallout New Vegas. Shit, man, I can't even go on a walk without blasting Ain't That a Kick in the Head in my AirPods and pretending like my boring Ohio suburb is the Mojave. In other words, I'm a fucking insufferable human being. So you need to understand that the moment I got word that there was even a Fallout New Vegas ARG to begin with, a combination of my favorite game of all time with one of the primary things I cover for my literal job, I avoided literally everything about it for as long as possible. No, I am not kidding. Sagan, and by extension, Sinister Heart as well, you guys probably made wonderful videos on the topic. You don't get 5 million views otherwise, but I knew I wanted to cover this myself one day, and even if we possibly come to similar conclusions, I do possess one thing that you guys didn't have at the time: a completed ARG. Last month, Bosch put out a note to his fans saying that the story is essentially concluded. There's the possibility of more on the horizon, obviously, but for now, the 20 videos provided to us seem to be the conclusion to the story Bosch wants to tell at this current moment. So, enough of a self-indulgent purity testing from me. What exactly is Dr. Bosch? As all the setup would have you expect by now, the first entry of Dr. Bosch would simply detail his process on getting outside of the Mojave Outpost. The video is as rudimentary as a circa 2012 movie maker guide could be, with a random-ass sample text showing up here in the first 3 seconds. To my knowledge, the method that Bosch ends up using to get out of bounds is not found in the base game, despite it being possible to get out of bounds here using other means. My guess is that this is a slight change that was just made to streamline the first entry, but it could also mean something later on. Ironically, Bosch even ends up falling over back inside before even getting out of bounds, only to seemingly get back in on the other side. Again, not something you can just do in base New Vegas. Once outside, Bosch doesn't really do much of note. He attempts to do more parkour, but fails because he says his spacebar isn't very responsive. And while fooling around some more, he ends off the video by shouting out someone named Mark for the idea, and says he'll explore more. This video is really bare bones, but it kind of needs to be. I won't be stopping coverage to analyze every video like this most of the time moving forward, but there's so much unique stuff here that I feel it's integral to point out, as it's not going to be things we will see with further entries. First off, Bosch's commentary through text is not something that is going to be present again in further entries. The only way we'll be able to gauge any reaction from him is through the body language in the way that he is playing, as well as really short and vague sentences left in descriptions. Speaking of which, this upload actually does hold an interesting sentence. Mark suggested that I did a voiceover, but I had no mic, so the text was a compromise. Intro and outro were cut for whatever reason, but it's not like anyone outside the forum was gonna watch these anyways. Again, this Mark character is mentioned, as well as a supposed forum Bosch is posting this to. He also does feel the need to mention that the intro and outro have mysteriously been cut out, and at the beginning, we do hear this sound. I tried the usual method of putting this through a spectrogram, but it came up with no obvious results, so I don't think this is necessarily important right now. For the shortness of this installment and the seemingly innocuous nature of it all, there are certainly many things here that don't seem to add up. How was Bosch able to so easily get out of bounds? Why are there supposed corruptions that are taking place? Who the hell is Mark? Hopefully, all these questions will be answered as we descend further into the wasteland. Except for the Mark thing, I don't think he'll be important again. The video titled Mojave Raw picks up almost exactly where the first video ended off. Bosch leaves a message in the description that is much shorter note this time around. Raw footage, originally sent to just friends, posted it to the forums unedited in the end. The entry is a lot longer than the one that we just covered, so I'll be summarizing only the important parts, or anything I just find interesting. The player takes his first steps outside the Mojave Outpost gate, the terrain not looking that abnormal from what you'd find typically. Once Bosch gets far enough away, he even pulls out his hunting rifle to look at how far the outpost statue has gotten from his position. This doesn't discourage him from continuing to explore, however. A lot of this footage is innocuous, until around the 2-minute mark, where a strange metal structure is found right outside of the gate. Although interesting, there's nothing that would say otherwise to this just being a leftover asset accidentally placed here before the game shipped. The player seems to be absolutely infatuated with this thing for a while, though. Shooting it, attempting to climb it, using it as a vantage point so he could hardscope the NCR statue one more time. After he gets bored, another statue is quickly spotted in the distance. The song Lone Star starts playing as Bosch walks closer, and we'll soon find out that this is the second to last song the New Vegas radio will play for the rest of the series. Amazing news for me, as I won't have to worry about being claimed anymore, but I can imagine that this will be kind of distressing for Bosch as time goes on. I don't know if it's intentional, but the first lines of Lone Star eerily match up with the state of events that are currently taking place. I can see that Lone Star from 1,000 miles away, calling me back home, though I ventured far astray. When I see that beacon shining for me all alone, it calls me back to Texas and to home. The irony here is that we're likely not heading home, even though we have ventured far astray. As the sun starts to set, Bosch inches closer to this strange structure in the distance, noticing that as he approaches, he's officially gone beyond the border of the map present on his Pip-Boy. The abandoned house asset leaves little discovery to be found again, and this can still easily be classified as a leftover asset. The Pip-Boy switches over to the last song that we'll hear played from it, Shadow of the Valley. Again, the lyrics eerily fitting the theme of what is currently happening on screen. In the shadow of the valley, I would like to settle down. Wide open space, wind on my face, a distant horizon, the moon on the crest, in the shadow of the valley that I love best. I have wandered many places, but they're all the same to me. Nowhere I found to settle down. A little bit further, I'll find my rest in the shadow of the valley that I love best. Again, it's not too difficult to see how these lyrics could resonate with the given situation at hand. It's as if our Pip-Boy is directly talking to us, as if we're given a warning to turn back now, lest we find our rest. It can be purely coincidental for all I know, but it's something that I haven't seen any of the comments point out up until now, so I wanted to share this. In the distance, Bosch spots another strange metal structure and pieces of a house. The amount of leftover assets that are here is starting to get eerie within the vast black emptiness. Eventually, a larger abandoned house is found that actually features some junk items in it. Why were these left here? The structures themselves kind of make sense, but we would in no circumstance be able to find these empty bottles and tin cans. I'd like to also mention that this is officially when our radio turns off. I believe that this is the pinpoint of the point of no return. Ultimately, there is nothing to do over here. Heading south from the structure leads to a makeshift campfire with, again, more junk items. One of these being a lunchbox, but when we interact with the lunchbox, oh shit, Long Dick Johnson is back. We are fucked! Bosch gets a quest marked, despite it being outside of the playable parameters. More cut content. The marker tells him to very slightly go northwest, and as he looks out into the distance, the video comes to a close. So no, unfortunately the quest isn't a reference to Long Dick Johnson, sorry that I got your hopes up. M. Johnson Ver is a really strange quest name that sounds like absolute gibberish, but there's really only one person that this could serve as a reference to. Richard Mentor Johnson, the 9th Vice President of the United States. Vice President to Martin Van... Once again, the video titled Stuck picks up exactly where the last video left off. It's pretty rare for any of the videos going forward to not do this, so if it does happen, I'll point it out. The description is once again short and vague, simply reading, "Kept exploring. There was nothing else to do." The first thing Bosch seems to try to do is flip through the radio stations to try to turn them back on, none of them playing anything. Although, the DLC ones do play static, which is a cool detail. Bosch really wants his radio back, even turning up the sound settings, but alas, nothing works. Exploration in the Out of Bounds becomes a lot more frantic from this point on, seemingly trying to make it to the quest mark, while Bosch still seems to be absolutely infatuated with all the rubble around. To be fair, nothing super insane has happened yet, so I guess it makes sense. On the way to the quest mark, we actually stop by the Mojave Outpost again, Bosch visibly showing excitement about this. Until he gets closer. None of the NPCs actually seem to be at the outpost anymore, the place looking like it was hastily abandoned in the middle of the night. This in itself would be insanely strange, but the revelation that things have truly gone wrong wouldn't come until Bosch attempts to get back into Bounds. The way he came in isn't working. Fast traveling is giving an error. Nothing Bosch does at this current moment can allow him to escape the trap he's placed himself in. And you could really start to see this through the mannerisms of how he plays. Although we rarely hear from Bosch himself, so much is said through the body language of his inputs that it's honestly impressive. Even down to getting spooked by changes in ambience, it's all sold really well here. Hey, so little editing memo here, but one of the things that I noticed while I was going back through the footage is that if you look here, the Mojave Outpost statues have switched positions. Typically the NCR Ranger is on the right and the Desert Ranger is on the left, but if you look here, they've swapped. I don't know how many memos like this I'm going to be leaving throughout the video. I probably will find a few other things that I missed while I was writing the script, but I thought that this particularly was a really cool detail. I'm telling you, this project is filled to the brim with stuff like this. I'm definitely not going to get every single thing in this video, so absolutely keep your eyes peeled, and if you see anything interesting while we're covering this, absolutely let me know. Before going back into the wastes, we see that for some reason, chips from the casinos on the strip are in one of the dilapidated buildings. This obviously wasn't something that was there before, Bosch even stating so in the first episode. These had to have been placed here. The rest of the episode is really just meandering around outside the outpost, Bosch wanting to find a way to get back into the Mojave, though the attempts prove futile, and he continues to follow the marker forward. While venturing back into the vast, dark expanse of the wastes, Bosch continues to find more of these random structures of ruined foundation. Although maybe out of coincidence, the discovery of multiple of these weird metal contraptions has led us to stumble upon a radio signal. UVB 68. Tuning into the frequency, it seems to just be static, not dissimilar to the static emitted by the DLC frequencies. But after adjusting the tune once more, we start to get something. It sounds like a recording of someone's voice, the frequency seeming to occasionally overlap with music as well. The audio as of right now is not legible, nor is the name of the frequency, so we'll simply just have to proceed for now. In the distance, Bosch seems to spot smoke? Upon further investigation, it seems to be coming from a barrel, but strangely no fire actually seems to be present inside. Does this mean the title is like a double entendre? This could also very well be a signal, so I don't know, just an interesting thought. The detour abruptly ends, however, as Bosch continues to approach the quest marker, a shack in the distance. As he does, the frequency gets more ear-piercing and illegible. Unlike the ruined houses from before, this marker evidently leads us to the first interior we have found out here. As the sun rises over the wasteland, Bosch enters inside, having us lose our signal. Now, unlike previous entries, this one gives us a lot more to chew on. The discovery of not just multiple, but what turns out to be a whole farm of these bizarre metal structures giving us a signal is absolutely connected in some way. And that name, UVB-68. While there's no actual station named UVB-68, there is in fact a very similar and also very unnerving station connected to the real world that fits this description. UVB-76. I'll keep this very brief, as to my knowledge, this isn't actually that relevant to the story at large, but the signal is notorious for being an incredibly mysterious Russian radio that broadcasts 24/7, 7 days a week. Ever since the late 70s, no one really knows the purpose of this broadcast, other than it likely being used by the Russian military in some way, shape, or form. The strange monotone frequencies it emits with rare interruptions of words spoken in Russian is eerily similar to the things we hear emitted through UVB-68. And when looking at all the other call signs that have been used for this station in the past, Yegstech is among one of them. So that's another half of this quest name's mystery solved. UVB-76 is a really bizarre rabbit hole in its own right, and you can find a live stream of the broadcast that plays literally non-stop to like 5 average viewers at a time. And you can spot some interesting characters in here like Robert Nana Kwam Azar Q9I, who shares Metatron Robert a shared delight, word true, prejudice, good, and predomic melodic holy spirit ratified, yes, senior loyal prince's salute. What the fuck? The station also seems to get hacked occasionally, my personal favorite instances being when a spectrogram of the fucking troll face was played here, or Nirvana's The Man Who Sold the World cover. The fucking Russian military broadcast station, by the way, this thing literally has the nickname Doomsday Radio and you're putting a troll face on it. Okay, I'm getting wildly off topic and I'm sorry, but I bet no other video essay on this topic has talked about the fucking troll face hijacking. Bosch starts to explore the abandoned shack, looking for anything of note. The description reads pretty bad loot, however, so don't expect us to find an AMR or something. He starts by taking a string of items sitting on a cabinet. This consists of nothing that special: surgical tubing, scissors, and morphine? Remember this for a little bit, we'll touch upon it more. He continues to loot the cabinet, finding some MREs, an item that you can typically only find in the Divide, as well as something called an emergency mask. Going to equip it, we see that the model is that of the Raider Blastmaster helmet, the item being renamed for a reason outside of my understanding at the moment. The model features a firefighter helmet alongside a gas mask, and if you're wondering, the model seems to resemble the NSA Mine firefighting gas mask because of course I'm the only fucking freak that would know this information. Get used to seeing it, because from this point forward, Bosch doesn't take it off. Behind this cabinet sits a bathtub with a shotgun, and what seems to be a syringe. However, neither items seem to be obtainable. We'll soon find that this isn't the strangest thing going on in this corner, however. This is definitely the most surreal thing we have stumbled across so far. From what I can tell, it's not explained why these objects, including a chemistry station, are upside down, but it's a theme that we should remember in case it comes up again later. Bosch once again shows off his emotion through body language when this really bizarre event occurs. Sitting on a shelf next to the left of the bathtub, there's a collection of children's toys. When Bosch interacts with a red block, a pop-up appears at the top right. Good. Now press Z again to let go of the skull. He proceeds to throw the block across the room and shoot it. Bosch continues to loot the house of any valuables, grabbing an empty sunset bottle here, a syringe finger there, you know, the usuals, until he stumbles upon a really interesting item. A black box. Now, if you don't know what a black box is, they're a really grim piece of technology meant to archive flight data and the last words of a cockpit voice recorder in the event of a crash. They're meant to withstand really harsh conditions and are used to diagnose what problems that led to a plane crashing. This item is stationed here along with another black box, as well as developed film. Picking up these three gives us a note to our quest. MJV_code code yourself smarter. We'll touch on this in a bit. The last item Bosch finds in this corner is a signaling gun or flare gun. For maximum roleplay value, he takes a seat on the sofa and looks through the logs he had picked up on his Pip-Boy. The first black box is an image depicting the HUD camera of a plane. As a commenter pointed out, the interface looking nearly identical to declassified footage of an F-16's HUD camera, or what might prove to be more accurate in our case, an F-14 HUD camera. Before getting to the black box audio, there are two other pictures to look at. The first is kind of undiscernible, but from what I'm able to make out, it looks like an aerial view of land from the cockpit of a plane. Notably, you can make out what looks like a horizon right here. The second picture depicts radio towers from the real-life location of Black Mountain, Nevada. A location that you can not only visit in-game, but is also part of a radio show that you can tune into to listen to the absolute super mutant diva Tabitha mouth off.
We'll be right back after this word from our sponsor, during which Raoul will contemplate how lucky he is to be alive.
The black box recording itself is really intriguing.
Okay, let's head north.
The voices here are a lot more discernible than the ones that were coming from the UVB frequency, and that's because it's directly sampled from the 1989 Gulf of Sidra incident. The one featured in the video is a heavily edited snippet of the recording, which strangely abruptly ends despite still seemingly having more than half the time left. How important the actual Gulf of Sidra incident is to this whole mystery is sort of lost on me, and still likely feels like just an eerie Easter egg, like the name of the UVB radio station. The only notable thing I could find when doing research on the conflict was when the nation of Libya claimed much of the Gulf of Sidra, the territorial waters were colloquially declared a line of death. Crossing the line, in turn, would invite a military response. In other words, you can interpret that as going out of bounds. Bosch equips his signaling gun, the shack making a really strange noise in response. Leaving the shack, the sun has risen over the Mojave, the sky looking really yellow, even yellower than it typically looks. This entire episode has had a lot of really interesting implications through its environmental storytelling. When you start to actually analyze the items shown throughout this shack, it starts to paint a picture of a very eerie scene. We find several pieces of surgical equipment throughout the shack. Surgical tubing, a surgical mask, a chemistry set, a severed finger, and of course, morphine. The black box in the corner, something typically only recovered from plane crashes also being here, gives us an idea of what possibly could have happened. Near here could have been a plane crash of some kind, possibly caused by an air battle. Whoever owns this shack could have stumbled upon the wreckage, and the person who crashed could have potentially still been alive. The morphine and surgical equipment found around the shack could have been in hopes of the person inside to resuscitate the pilot, possibly even needing to remove a finger at some point. Even the emergency mask and MREs found could point to this, these being things that the pilot had on him at the time. The Blastmaster helmet being specifically renamed to allude to this being the stand-in for a flight helmet, though this doesn't explain the syringe and the shotgun found in the bathtub. Whatever happened here could have been a lot more sinister than just wanting to help a fallen pilot. Anyways, let's talk about morphine. I've been alluding to the importance of this syringe being labeled as morphine for the entire section, so I'll finally explain why. It's because there isn't an item in any Fallout game that is labeled morphine. Well, not specifically, at least. Med-X is a chem that debuted in Fallout 3. Its purpose is to be a painkiller, typically giving you a 25+ damage resistance for the remainder of the drug's effect on you. Its practicality not being similar, but near identical to the functions of real-life morphine. But it's not called morphine. Well, it actually was meant to be. Med-X was actually a name given to the item morphine at the last minute due to the real-life drug name causing censorship of a worldwide release, specifically in Australia. The name ID for Med-X in the files of the game is even still morphine. This is a really niche piece of Fallout trivia that is reflected inside of this video, but it doesn't give us a direct answer as to why this Med-X is called morphine, but that quest marker from earlier might help give us a hint, as now this serves as the second callback to Van. The video opens up with Bosch already having shot a flare into the sky, the flare just straight up vanishing before it can even hit anywhere. Before heading further, an actual investigation of the car in front of the shack happens, with nothing much of note being able to be found, at least in the car itself. Next to it is a strange assortment of junk items once more, one of the weirder ones being a severed ear. Now, just like the severed finger that was in the shack, this would already be weird on its own. But then I thought about it a little bit more. There is no item in Fallout New Vegas that is meant to just be an ear. Sure, there's severed legionary ears that you can find as a quest item, but there's no regular severed ear you can just find in the wasteland. But there is in Fallout 3. Despite the two sharing the same model, they do differ in their names and purposes across the two games. 3 and New Vegas share an insane amount of overlapping assets, but the name carrying over from 3 here to New Vegas is really peculiar. Before heading out, Bosch just kind of lingers around the shack for a little bit, taking in the scenery. Though, when he spots this terminal behind the house, the UVB signal picks back up. Looking through the terminal, most of the options are shown as errors, except one, which just seems to be an excerpt about firearm maintenance. Again, this isn't text that can be found in New Vegas, but rather on one of the terminals in Fort Independence, a location in Fallout 3. The Fallout 3 parallels so far have been incredibly strong, but I'm not entirely sure what it means just yet. Heading away from the shack, we see a massive radio tower looming in the distance, possibly being the thing that made us pick up our UVB signal. Although as we approach, we see like 5 more load in, one of them being on top of a massive dilapidated high-rise, a type of building that you don't really see in the Mojave, but rather something a lot more reminiscent of the DLC location, The Divide. The player is noticeably perplexed by this discovery, attempting to climb the towers and also shooting a flare in the high-rise's direction. Right under one of the towers is a dilapidated building with a campfire inside. And there is a stash of consumable items as well as remains? Looking at the icon of it in the inventory, it seems to not exist. Although it gives you +1 HP for 5 seconds, so Bosch does not hesitate to eat it. Must have learned that one from the White Glove Society. Outside of the trailer sits 2 water bottles with 1,900,025,835 rads. Jesus Christ, you might as well drink raw uranium. I don't think there is a single instance of rads ever going in the 100,000s, let alone millions like this. The only place in the entire franchise I believe comes even remotely close is only found in Fallout 4, and that even still caps around at 10,000. Something is seriously not right out here. Heading east from here lies this massive crater, the landscape looking scorched compared to everything else we have seen so far, as if a nuke landed here. The rads counter going up as we approach, giving credence to this. Moving around this crater, these giant vertigo-inducing concrete walls block out our immediate way forward. Again, it's as if the world itself is trying to block us away from something. Behind this wall seems to lie a vast, big empty. Looking at the Pip-Boy, we seem to have made it from the southern part of the Out of Bounds up west. As we can see Canyon Wreckage, the entrance to the Lonesome Road DLC, not far by. Approaching more ruins in the distance, the radio lets out a really disturbing final sound before the connection is cut once again. As commenters pointed out, this final stretch of audio, again, has a really disturbing origin. The final part of this transmission is the last words said of the astronauts during the Apollo 1 incident in 1967. The mission never flew, the cabin of the shuttle catching on fire during the launch rehearsal, killing every astronaut involved. The final words being their screams. Again, why this is here is unknown to me at the moment. That scorched landscape we saw earlier could possibly have something to do with it. Maybe an incident here similar to Apollo 1, but with the power of an entire nuke could have happened, leaving this crater in its wake, still burnt to ash, still irradiated. Bosch continues to head east, discovering an even larger pile of rubble before something heavily unexpected happens. He discovers canyon wreckage, an area in bounds, but this is not canyon wreckage, at least from how we know it. The implication here is pretty clear. The Mojave wasteland, as we once knew it, may not even exist out here anymore. The landscape having been replaced with these desolate structures that might vaguely resemble what we grew to know, while also being nothing like it. The place we discover in order to realize this revelation is also incredibly smart. Lonesome Road is a DLC that many praise for feeling like what a landscape that hasn't been able to move past the apocalypse would feel like, far greater than the Mojave does. A common misconception a lot of people have about Fallout, and honestly Bethesda might even too, is that Fallout is meant to be post-apocalyptic, but in actuality, it's more post-post-apocalyptic. New nations have formed from the ashes, trying to piece back together the new world. Societies and tribes using pre-war technology as well as their own ingenuity have started to thrive in what was left of this world. The Divide is somewhere that does not reflect this at all, and that is a big part as to why it is my favorite DLC. I also just love Ulysses. I don't care what people say about him, you just don't understand the purpose of his character, but I am getting heavily off track here. I bring all of this up just to hone in the point that the parallels between the Divide with the vast expanse of this desolate and ruined landscape of the Out of Bounds are not lost on me. And if the parallel here was intentional, then it was extremely smart. Walking around this new canyon wreckage leads to little discovery. There's another radio tower here, along with one that looks to have fallen at some point. There doesn't seem to be a way to get back in the main wasteland from here either, and as Bosch looks, he seems to have gotten spooked by another odd noise in the distance. Heading south from canyon wreckage leads us to more invisible barriers again, something that feels really intentionally placed for what is supposed to be the Out of Bounds, with nothing much else to do. The player goes back to explore more of the canyon wreckage, and evidently, something was here all along. Underneath what looks like a hollowed-out missile silo is the entrance to a bunker that goes down several flights of stairs. Opening the door at the bottom leads to a small shelter littered with multiple junk items, as well as what looks like a safe. However, the door is completely inaccessible. There's a few terminals scattered around, but the first doesn't seem to hold anything worth commenting on, since it's just a bunch of periods and, like, the letters CL. I don't know what that can stand for, like, fucking caring Luigi. On the floor is a bedroll that actually gives us a unique message screen once picked up. Well-preserved sleeping bag. Hasn't been used in a while. This is likely directly telling us that this place has not had any occupants for quite some time. Further searching inside the bunker, Further searching inside the bunker, Bosch just starts to, like, throw shit around before finding a lantern melee weapon, something he seems particularly infatuated with for a moment. But that is far from the only interesting thing down here. What the fuck are you doing here? So, the platinum chip, the thing that is literally the reason why there's a New Vegas plot in the first place, is just chilling in a random-ass bunker, along with many other chips from plenty other casinos. But for some reason, Bosch doesn't bother taking all of them, despite the fact that cashing all of them would equal to more than 35,000 caps if he made it back to the strip. Like, what the fuck are you doing? The second terminal down here leads for a lot more to be uncovered than the first. Although all of the options are labeled as null, some are able to get working. Many entries are just pictures of what is likely the Mojave landscape, one featuring the Vegas Strip with several streaks in the sky, streaks that are present in almost all of the other photos. Sleuthing further leads us to find redacted email conversations between two unknown parties.
Loading it into the console crashes everything. I knew he'd pull something like this.
Subject: truck.
You sure this thing is the right truck?
The next page is a document, the top reading cargo something. Right under it, we can see its delivery destination is the Lucky 38 Tower in Las Vegas, and the amount of what's being carried is 1 of 1. This is nothing that I can think of this as other than the shipping details of the platinum chip. Nothing else on this terminal seems accessible, so it's left for now. Somehow this is still more info than the DOJ can give us. On the bed next to the terminal, however, is a pistol. No, literally, it's just called pistol. Bosch tries to equip it, but the thing is completely broken. Just as it looks like Bosch has found something of note down here, he stumbles upon something really strange. A briefcase, but one that is marked as owned. Therefore, taking it would count as stealing. Curious about the briefcase, Bosch equips it before throwing it to the ground, which triggers a cue as if it's about to explode. Bracing for cover, nothing seems to happen. The beeping stops, and Bosch is rewarded with a generous 5 XP for his work here. Picking up the briefcase now no longer classifies as stealing, as if the beeping was just a way to transfer ownership of something. Now, to my knowledge, nothing like this exists in New Vegas itself, rather having an origin to a mod that's been around since at least 2013 from this article that I found. You can see that the custom icon for the briefcase is near identical, although it doesn't seem like the mod is around anymore. The Nexus page stating it's been set to hidden due to being broken. The player collects the briefcase once more and starts to exit the bunker. Really bizarre noises are able to be heard just as he leaves the premises. We're back at Canyon Wreckage, starting the journey once more. The time outside is making the landscape look noticeably darker, with sandstorms starting up. There's little discovery for some time outside of this strange pile of rubble, another looking close by. But once this gets investigated, it looks like we have found the crash site of that pilot. Despite more of that mystery solved, there doesn't seem to be anything of note in the crash site itself. Night starts to fall on the wastes, the sandstorms kicking up further, until... Are you fucking kidding me? Don't ever buy no jet from no fiends, bro. The next thing you know, you're walking west and you find the fucking killer fish from San Diego. We see more schools of these airfish just floating about as we walk. Are we possibly walking through what was meant to be a lake? The water not placed here, but assets such as the fish, and possibly even a secret in the form of the wrecked plane crash are still present. Also, not to go on another tangent, but like, imagine this scenario from the lens of the courier character themselves for a second. For dialogue in the game, it's possible that you might not even fucking know what a fish is, so imagine not only having for the last 2 days been stranded in some nightmare realm, not being able to get back home, and the first sign of life you see is a species you've literally never seen before doing something it's not even supposed to be doing. There's not a way to actually kill fish in New Vegas, so the only thing Bosch can really do is just ignore the oddities and continue walking northwest towards the location marker. The crater gets deeper and darker as we progress to the destination, giving further credence that this was almost likely meant to be a lake at some point. But if there was meant to be water here at some point, I think we'll find relief to there not being now. This upload is very strange at a first glance, completely derailing the flow of the uploads so far. Bosch even says in the description that this video is not his. Maybe someone else from the forum mentioned in the first episode? In the video itself, the only scary thing seems to be the player willingly listening to Johnny Guitar. After taking out a band of mercenaries, their gaze seems to get captured by something in the distance. Despite the video having been captured in 1080p, the actual quality does not reflect that, so it's really hard to tell what the player is actually looking at. Dr. Bosch even points out himself that he can't make out a glow either, but at the very least he tells us we're meant to be looking for a glow. If we bump up the saturation, it may be possible that there is a strange outline omitting from this part of the cliffside. This could be a myriad of things. Maybe the lights from that strange radio tower that we ran into a few episodes back. Some people even toyed with the idea of this possibly being Bosch shooting around his flare gun like a fucking idiot every other second. I'm not really sure. This video is too short to make out any other notable oddities other than that. I guess I can point out that at this location a UFO can be present, but that's only if you have the Wild Wasteland perk, so its omission here isn't really anything that abnormal. Although separate people experiencing oddities could give credence to other things we'll talk about later. As for now, let's see what Bosch is dealing with in that bottomless pit. The video starts with data-moshed footage before a descent into the pit starts to be attempted. The flare gun does little to nothing to reveal what's at the bottom, and the process of getting there is kind of long and tedious, so I'll speed things up. At around the 2-minute mark, you can start to make out a setup of some sort at the bottom of the pit. Once at the bottom, the setup is revealed to be a chair placed on the front of a checkerboard and a stool with a terminal on it. To its right, a radio. Bosch sits down at the setup and gives quite possibly my favorite shot in the entire series. At some point, the radio station next to them actually starts playing Morse code. Now, I have no idea how to translate Morse code on the spot. I'm not fucking Dustin Henderson, so I put it through a spectrogram and solved it that way.
This thing's hollow. It goes on forever, and...
This is another reference, this being a cut-off excerpt of a line from 2001, A Space Odyssey. The full phrase is...
This thing's hollow. It goes on forever, and oh my god, it's full of stars.
Although this is a phrase featured in the original novel, it's not actually mentioned in the theatrical adaptation. One of the first results when searching the quote itself is a Reddit thread on the Mandela Effect board talking about remembering hearing it in the movie. Now, I can't really find many other examples of this being a popular Mandela Effect contribution, and the only other source comes from Reddit, so I have no idea if this is meant to be connected in any way, but I thought it would at least be worth mentioning. Descending into the void-like cavern further, Bosch stumbles upon a hidden entrance right next to the setup. Once again, it's another object only labeled as null. Heading inside finds him a cave. Exploration down here is very brief for now and picks up right in the next installment. We pick up with Bosch finding and collecting a knife. The expedition through the caves is nothing short of suspenseful. This is definitely the scariest installment so far. So much of the stuff down here makes no sense. Radios playing static in abandoned minecarts, random patches of blood and indistinguishable gore laced on the walls and ceiling, a giant pit of green radioactive water, a baby crib with a blue ribbon inside. Even Bosch comments on this place place as falling apart at the seams. The most emotion he's probably put into any of these descriptions since episode 1. Even with all the oddities we experienced in the wasteland, the vibes down here are now meant to be screaming in your face that something is not right. But the only thing Bosch can seem to do at this point is look for an exit. The discoveries continue to keep this dreadful theme, the only boxes to loot coming in the form of these gore bags. An asset so niche it literally only ever shows up in 2 locations in the entire game, a few being able to be found at the cave at Lake Mead and Black Mountain. One of the discoveries that's made further into this cave is this monolithic stone face carved into a random part of the cave's wall. Something that feels so random, yet so intentional with the aesthetic at the same time. A part of Fallout's look that went on to become more abandoned as the series matured was this Art Deco architecture. Something prominently featured all throughout Fallout 1 and 2, and even some places in 3. 4 and onwards would start to divorce itself from this aesthetic, leaning less into gothic monoliths and more Jetsons, even if it's a complete downgrade. Faces and stone statues of people being carved into the sides of buildings was such a staple for former owners of Fallout's Interplay and Black Isle's aesthetic. This building in the back of the opening cinematic of Fallout 1, the Cathedral in Fallout 1, the Enclave oil rig in Fallout 2, all of these things have this eerie, larger-than-life sense to them that would make the landscape resemble that more of Gotham City than our traditional style of this world's West Coast cities. This, having been featured here, feels like another remnant of a style that was meant to be forgotten, hidden away in this cave, far beyond anything the player is actually meant to see. Exploring further leads us to a crashed van? How the hell did this get down here? Weirder than that, the only things the crates inside seem to have been carrying are chips from the 3 casinos on the strip. Back in that bunker, one of the only accessible emails did mention a truck, and with all the chips that were down there as well, this seems to be a delivery that was intercepted at some point. More nonsensical discoveries make themselves known to us in the form of several pieces of heavy machinery being scattered all throughout, with a plank leading to another bottomless pit beside it. Bosch narrowly makes his way down, the bottomless pit leading to an even deeper level of the cave. Interestingly, despite entering from multiple hatches and pathways, when we look behind us, there doesn't seem to be any sign of an exit that can be seen after entering. Whatever hell he continues to seal himself in is one that he will not be able to crawl back out of. Not far from the entrance lies possibly one of the most significant discoveries yet. It's Bosch. It's his exact outfit, sporting the name Hieronymus B. On himself is a note labeled Instructions. Set it up. You will know where. Unknown friends will come find you. He proceeds to take the gear off of him, using it to repair his own, as if this version of him is being sent to finish whatever the other couldn't, implying the cycle has been repeated before. Next to the body is another tunnel going deeper, again, with no way to return back. The scenery down here is a lot more visible than before, so that's good at least, I think. There's a passageway leading towards the 2 gates. One is completely submerged in rubble, so it's not really enterable. The other, however, leads to a new door. Huh. We find ourselves in an interior that vaguely resembles the casinos on the Strip, just stripped away of any notable decoration, as if this place was left vacant for one reason or another. Most of the doors around are inaccessible, aside from one, leading to a lower level of this facility. Going further down adds to the suspense. The ambient noise gets louder, visibly spooking Bosch as it plays. At the bottom is a door. We are now at the halfway point of these videos, and throughout it, I feel like I haven't been entirely transparent with you all. This 10th video feels like the point where things start to take a drastic turn. Reveals are made to point to something much more suspicious going on, as well as evidence piling up towards one more specific thread that is becoming too large to ignore. We are in hell. Hieronymus Bosch was a 16th century painter during the Renaissance era, with next to no information known about him as a person. What is known about him was his horrific, apocalyptic depictions of hell. Each one of his pieces is framed as if it's a single snapshot into the horrors of what could await for us beyond. Every scene is so chaotically filled with excruciating detail that you could examine just one painting for hours, and you'll likely still not spot every single detail there is to see. It really makes you think what a world like this would look like in motion. Though limited, the findings outside of the Mojave already seem to vaguely invoke some of the imagery Bosch is known for. Animals in bizarre scenarios, horrific and organic architectures, surrealist discoveries that don't make logical sense, all pointing to a world that applies and runs only by its own logic. The naive, apathetic, and frankly disconnecting words and actions of Dr. Bosch perfectly encapsulates the mystery behind the real man. Never once do we get a good glimpse at what Dr. Bosch's career looks like. All we get in the very early episodes is that he has gray hair, and it's not until he puts on the gas mask after the 5th episode do we get more dynamic views of his character in third person. Finding his own body at the end of this episode doesn't just give credence to the connection, it outright confirms it. And although there are many more examples that I could give that points to this hell theory, there's still much I'd wish to save. Not just to let the mystery organically unravel itself, but also because it's only half of what I want to talk about right now. Codename Van Buren, also known as Fallout 3, is a game that doesn't exist. The project was canceled in 2003, never seeing the light of day outside of the honestly rather expansive information and design documents we have been given throughout the years. In almost every episode since the second one, Van Buren has had so many subtle references to itself, essentially haunting the narrative of Dr. Bosch's playthrough. His vice president's name is the one on the text of the main quest. Items are renamed or replaced that reflect events not happening in our universe. Quests that would have been featured in the project, such as Code Yourself Smarter, are directly referenced, or the referencing of core design philosophies of the original Black Isle games being alluded to, such as the Art Deco aesthetic. New Vegas had already consumed a lot of Van Buren's ideas, Hoover Dam, the Legion, and Joshua Graham being notable ones, but this gives us the impression that New Vegas didn't just recycle ideas from the scrapped project, but directly consumed it somewhere along development. It makes you really wonder what the state of the franchise is in this universe. Things pick back up right after the glitch that ended last episode. Bosch looking displaced and disoriented from where he was at first, the scene looking like he was attacked in some way. Blood litters the floors, and his items have been displaced, specifically his lantern, briefcase, signaling gun, and binoculars. He's also had half of his health taken away. We'll see later on that every other item Bosch has acquired over time besides these things were also stripped from him, further feeding into that feeling that we're on the second half of this expedition. Taking a moment to recoup bearings, he heads into another room on this side of the building. The atmosphere is noticeably much more calming than previously. The ambience is soothing, and the room is well lit. It almost invokes the feeling of stumbling upon a safe room in a survival horror game. It's a slice of serenity in a world that's becoming overbearingly hostile. Interestingly, in this dining hall, there's a cropped out portion of the Ultralux billboard that can be found in-game, but with the faces blurred out. Given that this seems to be a dining hall, this could also be a nod to the White Glove Society, considering they wear masks in order to keep the allure of mystery of their identity. If that's the case, this steak that they eat to regain their health could be a lot sketchier than let on. I do want to point out that before Bosch investigates the dining table, he makes sure to make a detour behind this bar and steals all of the vodka and scotch. But considering he saw literal gore bags earlier, like, yeah, me too, man. This entire care package that seemed to be left here for him is really odd. The steak makes sense. It's to recoup the health that he lost during that attack. But beside the steak, there is also this blood bag labeled acrylonitrile. Looking up what this even was, I learned that it's a toxic chemical liquid primarily used to produce plastic and rubber appliances. So, like, not something that I would want to include in my bulking plate, but Bosch drinks it, so I guess he's just built different. The last consumable item here is a book labeled Tryphonic Protenoia. Now, this one leads down a really interesting rabbit hole. I wasn't sure what this was at all, but it's tied to a religious belief known as Gnosticism. This led me to do something I typically never do. Willingly read. The Trimorphic Protenoia is a really interesting text that really sets up the foundation of a lot of the fundamental beliefs of Gnosticism, but that's not the primary thing I want to briefly discuss here. Protenoia herself is described very in-depth in this scripture, but I less want to focus on what Protenoia is, and more what she is described to do in this scripture. And that's descending to the underworld in order to nullify and liberate from its effects. I descended to the mist of the underworld, and I shone down upon the darkness. Every bond I loosened from you, and the chains of the demons of the underworld I broke. The high walls of darkness I overthrew, and the secure gates of those pitiless ones I broke, and I smashed their bars. All of these things are examples of a force descending to the underworld in order to nullify it in some way. I could be really off base here, and if there's any New Vegas heads who also happen to be Gnostics watching this video, I am really sorry if I'm misinterpreting your text, but this was my interpretation, and it's the one I feel most appropriately fits into the context of what we've been dissecting. And one more thing about this Protenoia point too. This one could be a stretch, but at one point the scripture describes Protenoia as existing in a matter of three: the Father, the Mother, and the Son. Looking back at that Ultralux billboard, we see three figures, two masculine, one feminine. It could just be a convenient coincidence, but with how every other little detail has played out here, I thought it would at least be something interesting to point out. Moving back to the video, consuming the book in-game permanently increases Bosch's speech by 3. He then starts to do very mundane things like playing with physics objects, viewing his character in third person, etc. You really start to get the feeling that he is trying to prolong this piece he has currently found himself in. And once again, the mannerisms here perfectly encapsulate that. And if it wasn't obvious already, the long, sprawled out table with a subject directly in the middle is clearly meant to invoke the imagery of Da Vinci's Last Supper painting. There's another one of these rooms that leads into nothing but a white void, though Bosch this time is courageous enough to embark into this one, finding that it's a facade. Entering a new room, he spots what looks like a skeleton in the further area in front of him, though attempts to investigate further start causing the rats counter to tick like crazy, so he backs off of this room. Investigating the bathrooms has us stumble across 2 symbols graffitied onto the walls. Hobo symbols, something that is in the files of New Vegas, but go almost completely unused outside of the hospital cross outside of the New Vegas clinic. The ones here translate to something along the lines of this. This diagonal square with a line shape meaning hold your tongue, and this circle and line actually being 2 separate symbols. The circle means nothing here, and the line means doubtful. The circle and the line here feel like they directly contradict themselves in the statements they're trying to make, And we know there is something here. This room has been one of the most interesting we've stumbled upon this entire breakdown. Maybe instead of being left here at once, these are representing a conversation? Have more than one person already been here before? The door to the right side of the bathrooms, however... Huh. I feel like I've seen this before. On the other side of this hall is the entrance to a house. These house interiors kind of resemble the ones that are found in the Big Empty. There's nothing much interesting on the first floor, but the second floor is chock full of oddities. Rooms flipped upside down, just like how we saw at the very beginning of our journey. Windows that hold nothing but the void, rooms blocked off by furniture, and one room with a terminal. A terminal filled with practically endless null entries. At first, some of these entries seem to be gibberish, but opening up one gives us an excerpt from Moby Dick, and more supposed gibberish. And one of them is from the short story 3 Versions of Judas. Again, more biblical imagery. These null passages continue going on, but one of them looks more intentional than the previous. This looks like sentence structure, and Bosch is intentionally letting these ones play out longer than the previous. And I am honored to say for the first time in this ARG, we got a cipher. Thank you to this commenter for translating it, the cipher code being ROT13. Searching the source of this text, we can also find that it comes from the Nag Hammadi library, the same Gnostic library that Trimorphic Protanoia also belongs to. This text being the Sophia of Jesus Christ. This episode has already been extremely dense with information, so I'd rather just use these more as anecdotes for later than giving a full explanation of a Gnostic text again. Exploring the house greets us with even more oddities, such as this barricade with something indiscernible on the other side. A commenter pointed out that, to them, it looks like a massive head with a bleeding eye in the socket, but I personally can't see it. Bosch makes his way back to the much more comforting side of the room and sits at the bar. The episode ending on a far calmer and somber note than usual. Things pick off through entering a new door that hasn't been explored yet. The area, again reminiscent of the Ultralux. The rooms of this area get increasingly bizarre. Standing in the pool plays ambience of people speaking, separate rooms are completely closed off, and down here, we find a blast door that requires a key. In a really interesting turn of events, Bosch actually tries to brute force his way in with console commands in order to open this door. An action that is met with a swift punishment. Whatever has him here isn't allowing him the easy way. Opening the Pip-Boy after reveals the map has been replaced with this. An ominous red landscape, nothing even remotely resembling the Mojave anymore. In the middle sits us, in this strange, almost flower-like confine. We heal by drinking a bottle of Sunsets before proceeding into another room. This room also doesn't make any sense. Stationed directly inside of a void, with the path in front of us just barely being illuminated. A signal is picked up here once again. Some strange, indiscernible tower also visible in the pitch-black distance. Thankfully, our time here is cut short, leading to more industrial hallways. Most of the entrances don't make any sense, those familiar void doors still being here, along with this door that leads to an unenterable cage. In the same room with the blast door lies an elevator. Going down, we're brought to an environment reminiscent of the industrial hallways of the Sierra Madre, the red smoke on the floor even reminiscing the cloud. Inside of here are these machines producing something. Flat, indiscernible sheets of things, almost looking like a mattress made of flesh. Heading up the catwalk brings us to a toolbox with a key in it. Probably the key to that blast door, which, if it is really funny. Like, all Bosch had to do was walk into the other room to find a key, and he would have been able to save himself from being attacked by this shadow creature. Before heading back, there's this little room with a side terminal that has no readable entries, though the copyright says 1962 to 1976. This is very early on in the Fallout timeline, even compared to when the bombs drop. This date being so old is really, really strange, especially considering that Robco were the creators of this terminal, and they wouldn't have been created until decades after this point. Opening the closed-off door greets us with a more dilapidated version of the room above us. Heading to the left brings us to another catwalk, this one looking like it's inside of a cave. More machinery can be found here, as well as piles on top of piles of missiles. Do not let Ulysses down here, he'd have a fucking field day. There's nothing else really notable here, so we head back into the main room. Another door leads us to a white void, but for some reason, there's also just a rad roach chilling in here. If I'm correct, this is like the first actual entity we've seen in this entire series since episode 1. It doesn't really do anything though. Hitting it causes its collision to freak the hell out, and it starts falling in an infinite loop. Not wanting to deal with whatever this is, Bosch just closes the door and moves on. The door to the right leads us to what I believe to be the interior of Camp McCarran Airport, another really prominent NCR location, much like the Outpost. But again, this room doesn't seem to serve any practical purpose. Another room leads us to more clashing interiors, this looking reminiscent to the hotels of the Gomorrah Casino. The architecture here is once again impossible. Bosch is even able to sleep on an upside-down bed, the date and time reading December -9879. Time just doesn't seem to be a relevant concept down here. An interesting detail I'd feel remiss to not mention is that when entering this area, one of the things Bosch finds is a sweet roll. Now, this seems innocuous on the surface, but there is so much lore about this pastry and games made in the creation engine that I feel like I need to talk about it at least for a second, as it could actually help explain some of the stuff that's been happening down here. The sweet roll is something that has been a tradition found in every single Bethesda-made game starting from Oblivion, even being able to be found in Starfield. The item description even playfully boasting that it's the tastiest treat found in any universe. Sweet rolls aren't found in New Vegas, but they can be found in Fallout 3 and even Fallout 4. The existence of it here in New Vegas not only adds more to the Fallout 3 connections from way earlier in the video, but feels outwardly deliberate in a way that seems particularly intimate to the scope of events that have been transpiring. You get punished when you bend the rules. You get rewarded when you obey them. At least, that's what I've been picking up on. Walking around leads to some more oddities, a radio emitting a strange frequency. Hitting it causes the frequency to be suppressed. Walking down a hallway, one of the doors opens by itself. The room inside is even more desolate than before. And here sits a bathtub filled with void. The void being a door. The place we land is far more uncomfortable than where we were. Pitch black hallways stretch for as far as our eyes can see, the light of the Pip-Boy barely illuminating the path ahead. The player seems indecisive on the path he wants to take, doors to the side leading to nothing but rows and rows of bathroom stalls. One of them housing a toilet clogged with red dice. Okay, wait, actually, what? Wait, turn the music off. What the hell is this supposed to represent, you fucking place? The video ends with this. Congratulations, Dr. Bosch, you managed to scare the shit out of me with an MP3 file.
(2012-06-01, 1858-23). Scraping the hard drive. Managed to salvage this.
Wow. Despite having the shortest runtime of any of these episodes of the entire series, this is the most transparent and upfront any of these videos have been for us up until this point. And if you don't know why, it's a little bit of a story. I've been presenting this video from a very Fallout fan lens, and I understand that. If you're an actual normal person with a life that's watching this, I'd imagine it's probably a little hard to keep up, so I'll explain it as best as I can. Everything about this intro is so wrong. The companies Interplay and Black Isle serve as the companies that published this game. But not only did these two have nothing to do with the development of New Vegas, neither of them were even in operation for years after New Vegas entered development. The only way for this to even be remotely possible is if we're not just in an alternate universe, but an alternate timeline. Interplay and Black Isle are the two companies that founded the Fallout IP before handing the rights to Bethesda and having Obsidian contracted to make New Vegas. The existence of them here on the title screen tells us so much about the state of this timeline, and it certainly raises a plethora of questions in its wake. How did these companies survive going bankrupt? Did they still contact Bethesda to use the Gamebryo engine? We know that this game still runs in it through the use of their console commands, but more pressing than that, why is New Vegas missing from the sky? After narrowly escaping whatever threat was chasing us, we arrived somewhere else, the video opening with a really uncomfortable noise. Getting somewhat of a bearing of our surroundings, we notice that we're actually back in the same environment we came from. It's just this time, the lights have gone completely dim. It's like we wandered somewhere we weren't supposed to see, and now nothing's acting right. One thing that I didn't mention from the previous video because I was too focused on the fucking sweet roll, but does carry over into here, are the paintings that litter the walls of these hallways. I didn't pay much mind to them on a first watch, but after reverse image searching them, I discovered that a majority of them come from the same family of paintings. The paintings in question are the Black paintings by Francisco Goya, a painter belonging to the Romantic era, an art movement about 5 generations separated from Hieronymus Bosch. His most famous work, and the one that you've probably seen before, is the one depicting the Roman god Saturn devouring his son. The most noteworthy part about these paintings is the fact that they were never meant to be seen by anyone other than Francisco himself. The paintings weren't even translated to canvas, many of them were simply plastered right onto the walls of Goya's house. A lot of the art still has a deep hair of mystery behind them today, many still not knowing the true meanings of these works, other than inferring that they were made at a time of steep mental decline for the man. The most straightforward connection I can make to these paintings, with the rest of the context given to us, is the private and almost intrusive nature on our end of viewing these paintings. It feels like another subtle way the game, once again, telling us we are seeing something we are not supposed to be seeing. The landscape continues to deteriorate into something on the borderline of nightmarish and nonsensical. A room that is scaled up so large, we feel like an ant in comparison. Traversing through these dark corridors lands us into an auditorium of some kind. A chair here is marked as claimed, but we're able to sit down in it anyways. Surrounding us are many other chairs, as if there was some sort of meeting here long ago. Things get even stranger when we see a peek behind a curtain we can't walk through, sporting a newspaper clipping on the wall. Although we can't make out the exact words, the headline is very readable. House under investigation, Robco's future unclear. Now, I thought I was crazy for a moment when I first saw this because I never recalled seeing anything like this in the game itself. Because this is not present in New Vegas. This is something special. Something that can only be discovered here. Retracing our steps leads us back into a bedroom with a blast door we previously haven't seen. Inside is a giant industrial room with some sort of pod in the middle. The pod seeming to be our objective. Inside the pod sits a mangled and rotting corpse that still has a breathing mask on. We have the option to activate the pod, but Bosch seems to be uncertain at the moment, the terminology here being extremely vague. He equips the briefcase that I almost forgot we even had anymore, and out of what looks like to be instinct, tosses it towards the pod. The quest is complete. I'm unsure exactly what this means for now. The briefcase continues to beep, and Bosch now seems directionless. He heads out of this room, but not from the way he came. Instead, heading down an elevator to a dense, lush cave. So lush that it looks suffocating to walk through. In this cave, they find another body of themselves, just like the one we saw a few episodes ago. But this time, instead of Hieronymus B, it is simply named Null. Walking further in, we spot more, eventually stopping at an entire pile. Is this where previous attempts are disposed of? It's difficult to discern an answer as of now. Walking through the vegetation finally leads us to what looks like to be an exit. Another door to Null. The surrealism hits its fever pitch as the door leads us to a void. The only things surrounding us are these flat, suspended slabs of concrete. Although behind us is... In all seriousness, this is a pretty exceptional occurrence. Outside of the Radroach, this skeleton actually seems to be a functional entity. Still named Null, it doesn't seem to be able to do anything other than stand and shuffle around, possibly having the ability to look at us. The geometry of this place is extremely hostile, very uncertain of what would happen if we were to fall somewhere outside of here. Thankfully, the player safely makes his way to another door, but strangely, we're not met with a loading screen. Waking up somewhere completely different, it almost feels like as if we switched perspectives rather than traveled somewhere else. Getting our bearings, we notice that we're not actually somewhere new, but somewhere familiar. We're back in the Mojave, Around us, the infrastructure has been completely dilapidated, even further than it already was when we got here. The sky is a dark beige, a black hole sun looming over this hellscape. But as if things couldn't get even worse for ourselves. We don't know it now, but this explosion woke up something even more ferocious. Quite possibly an avalanche. Before the consequences of this have to be faced, we narrowly escape into a tunnel. For some reason, Bosch is really infatuated with picking up the cave mushrooms on his way. This cave very briefly ends, connecting into a collapsed tunnel entrance. Like a lot of the areas in these previous episodes, the atmosphere here really invokes the Big Empty, the location of the Old World Blues DLC, especially with the cave mushrooms I pointed out. There's a side room too, and from the looks of it, someone was residing in here at one point. A wasteland survival guide, teddy bear, and shotgun rounds can be found. It gives the environmental storytelling of someone leaving their kid here in a rush. Not far from the camp sits a skeleton with a shotgun in its hands. The implication here is pretty dark if the other room was to go off of anything. Bosch looks like he's about to enter a door to the wastes, but once again, perspectives seem to drastically shift without a loading screen. We are outside again, but there's no sign of where we came from. The landscape in the distance looks incredibly hostile. Behind us is a sitting corpse with a revolver to its side. The corpse being named Last Man. The eerie ambience continues, Bosch quickly pulling out his shotgun as the video ends. This video starts with a really high-pitched digital noise, as well as what appears to be a panning shot of a red sky. The description states that the video file seems to be pretty mangled, so corruptions like this may become a staple moving forward. Though the second paragraph of this description also perks my interest. I've gotten a lot of emails from people saying they have similar things happen to them in-game, but I've yet to receive a single video. We'll wait some more. It's nice to see that Bosch seems to be in contact with that forum throughout all of this. We find ourselves in the valley from earlier, the sky and ambience continuing to be as dark as when we left it. Though we don't seem to traverse here for too long, as another abrupt cut takes us to somewhere else that still looks to be in a similar area. Are we higher up? The artifacting when we transition up here is really strong. Something about these perspective switches just feels different. The POV here doesn't seem to be that important until a few more seconds in, where the screen starts to shudder, and we're again brought somewhere new. A building of some sorts, though our placement here doesn't last for long, being brought to the outdoors again. Our player finds a rifle? We didn't see this happen. This rifle isn't even from New Vegas. It's the Chinese rifle from Fallout 3. The radio is back on again, being a garbled compilation of voices that sound like they're talking to each other. A commenter pointed out that this is audio from a researcher involved in MK Ultra, which, I mean, that checks out. In the distance, there's a beeping noise that looks like Bosch is headed to. To the right, we spot some more stranged and mangled geometry before the screen cuts to black yet again. I'm really sorry if this is difficult to follow. It's this difficult to follow in the video. We're back in the building for a split second before a long cut takes us to a different space once more. The sky is now a dark crimson red. Bosch is holding the single shotgun that we found earlier, where we can also see our reserved ammo count has changed from 10 to 6. We fired at something. Beyond that, when crouching down, the top of the screen reads caution. We are actively being hunted by something. This is an absolutely brilliant way to build tension inside of the creation engine. Every game built like Fallout or The Elder Scrolls has a feature like this, but utilizing it in this context, where we don't even know the actual cause of the threat, just that there is something to be cautious about, is such a no-brainer concept. But after all the buildup we've had to this point is just so effective. The player opens the inventory for a brief second to show that he does have the Chinese assault rifle, so we can say that this is still him, at least. He strangely decides to pull out his bedroll and sleeps for 3 hours. This causes the video to cut again. An ear-piercing sound is played before we catch a view of a radio tower in the distance from the crevice of some sort of structure. This is quite possibly the most cinematic shot of this entire web series. We linger on here for a while before cutting back to a POV of the building we were in previously. Interestingly, our ammo reserve is back at 10, telling us that this footage isn't just corrupted, but also now seems to be out of order. That or Bosch just found 3 shotgun shells off screen, but I have a hard time believing that. Everywhere around this building houses holes that allow you to peer into the desolate landscape of the outside, but no way to actually get down. Cutting to another POV, we can tell that this is in the future once more due to the ammo reserve, though it's 8 and not the 6 from previously. Exploring this dilapidated structure, a Chinese pistol sits on the desk over here. Again, an item only found in Fallout 3, not New Vegas. Next to it sits a box for the Mojave Express. Instead of the usual splash text that shows up when you interact with this item, it sports this eerie line instead. Mojave Express delivery failure. Permanently out of service. Looking at the world map again, the entire thing is shrouded in a deep red, the world just being labeled as, you guessed it, null. One of the back rooms of this building houses a key to something in a toolbox. Going upstairs, we get a glimpse at another painting. This painting is a snippet of Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights, specifically the hell layer of the painting. If we were to cross-reference the exact placement of where this was on the painting, it's specifically the uppermost portion of hell, depicting a dilapidated city, high mountains, and a crimson sky. Sounds familiar. That's not the only notable painting up here, however. Another can be found right across from Bosch's, this one being the 1964 painting The Son of Man by surrealist painter Rene Magritte. I believe that this is the most modern piece of artwork referenced here so far. The inclusion of this painting specifically was lost on me, so I dug further with this one. The painting is supposed to represent a self-portrait of Magritte himself, and when asked about the purpose of the painting, more specifically the subject of the apple, he had this to say. At least it hides the face partly well. So you have the apparent face, the apple, hiding the visible but hidden, the face of the person. It's something that happens constantly. Everything we see hides another thing. We always want to see what is hidden by what we see. There is an interest in that which is hidden and which the visible does not show us. This interest can take the form of a quite intense feeling, a sort of conflict, one might say, between the visible that is hidden and the visible that is present. There's 2 contexts that I can think of where this can apply to the video itself. One is more literal, and that is that this is supposed to represent Dr. Bosch himself. Remember how I said we never see his face beyond the glimpses of the back of his head in previous episodes? That can very easily reflect the subject of this painting. The other interpretation is, again, the world directly mocking us for our curiosity getting ourselves in this situation in the first place. Magritte describes the painting almost as if it's a way to represent the concept of wanting to see what is hidden or not visible to us. Something we clearly possessed if we wanted to do this in the first place. Man, this video is making me feel like a whole-ass art scholar from reading Wikipedia articles. See how much knowledge we can learn together from stuff like this and not through making the fucking Garden of Banban 8 video? Next to the painting sits that same framed news article about the Mr. House investigation. Outside of that, there's still little to dissect here due to the resolution, other than the second headline article about strange lights over Pahrump, a real town in Nevada about 60 miles west of Vegas. Although the location is not actually featured in the game itself, this could possibly be alluding to the tragedy that could have been planned to befall it in the Fallout universe, as an unused graffiti stating "Avenge Pahrump" can be found in the game files. This potentially being another allusion to cut content, just like the entire newspaper clipping in general. The episode does not end on a light note, however, as we make one final cut to the outside. I guess that explains where all of our ammo was going. Outside of that rad roach, which I don't really count, this seems to be the first and only example of a hostile entity in our presence. But even then, we don't get a clear look at whatever it could be. All we know is that it just left us in danger. This episode doesn't really tell us anything we don't already know when it comes to our analysis, more just further expanding context and giving us further confirmation to things. There's also some interesting findings relating to a spectrogram in this video when these noises play. Running this through a spectrogram gives us two images, this little interesting mouse-type character, and a man stepping off an airplane. This image is actually of Howard Hughes, an aerospace engineer as well as a film producer. Prominent examples of his filmography are works such as 1931's Hell's Angels and 1932's Scarface. But for our purposes, he is not just a parallel, but the direct inspiration for Mr. House, in imagery and in personality. The rabbit hole here actually goes so much deeper than surface level connections. This man was essentially the real life Mr. House. So his picture being placed in this context is absolutely meant to be a stand-in just for House himself, possibly left here as early concept content. It's unsure as of right now, as Mr. House's role in this alternate version of New Vegas seems to be heavily different to his role in the final game. But with only 4 episodes left, the only thing we can really do at the moment is just see how this story concludes. The title of Nadir is already really interesting. This word directly means the lowest point in fortunes of a person or organization, while also having a secondary definition: the point on a celestial sphere directly below an observer, the space directly under the point of interest, the underworld. With both the investigation of Mr. House and Robco, and with the hell imagery all throughout the series, Nadir might be the best word to describe the entire channel, and just goes to show how thought out all of this seems to be up until this point. The only other thing I'd want to point out here before getting into the episode itself is the description simply reading, "Happy birthday." Happy birthday to who? This video was uploaded June 25th. Whose birthday was June 25th? Oh. If House's importance wasn't put at the forefront yet, this basically confirms it. The video starts with a HUD-less player walking through a path of lanterns, these lanterns being the only thing that illuminates this dark space, the footage directly data moshing into the aftermath of the previous episode. We can see that Bosch barely survived his encounter, running out of reserve ammo completely, barely surviving at just 1 HP as well as was being crippled. What could have possibly done this to him? The screen moshes again, shifting us to a valley covered in these massive red spheres before cutting again. Once again, we hear a code. Running this one through a spectrogram gets us this. I'm honestly not really sure what this one is supposed to be, but this is obviously meant to be a hand touching something. The first thing I thought that would be was the creation of Adam, but the hands don't exactly match up here. The footage corrupts once again, lingering on a skybox before moshing back into gameplay. Bosch seems to be slightly healed up now, but his limb condition is still not perfect. Surrounding him is a stone structure. To the left of him, the Freeside sign. Now, this is a particularly interesting detail because Freeside is a settlement in the game that was formed after the bombs dropped. It didn't exist in the same way it did pre-war, so the sign here is really interesting if the theory of Vegas not being protected from the bombs is true. Plunging deeper into this hellscape, in the sky, we can see that the moon has become massive. The texture quality also increasing an uncanny amount. In the rubble, we find the Courier 6 graffiti left by Ulysses as well. But the 6 is covered by those same hobo symbols from before. These translate to dangerous place, and possibly get out fast. This one is a little more difficult to prescribe. It could also mean courthouse or judge. Inside is a mountain of barrels covering a defaced painting of Mr. House, ironically the one that directly spoofs the picture of Howard Hughes. The graffiti specifically defacing him with a smile and the word peace written on his chest. More hobo symbols are also present here, specifically 3 lines meaning unsafe area. Okay, it's like 4 a.m. right now, and I'm doing my absolute best to get this video finished on time, but I would be remiss not to mention this as well. The smile that defaces House is actually very cleverly also a hobo symbol. You can see that there's a line here that kind of looks like a stick where the smile is, and that's because it's meant to represent a sickle. The sickle in hobo symbols means dishonest man, overtly calling House dishonest, again alluding back to that investigation that is supposedly taking place against him. Like I said, man, chock full of detail. This time, kind of literally. There's also a little Kilroy was here reference at the bottom as well. I don't know why they drew him to look like fucking Greg Heffley, but I won't question it. The discoveries down here continue to get really bizarre. There's another skeleton tucked away in here, but it's absolutely giant, as if it belonged to a giant. Next to it is a bird cage housing another tiny skeleton inside. Again, nonsensical imagery that invokes the same type of nonsense that would be found in a Bosch painting. The scene transitions again to one of the strangest and most nightmarish areas thus far. The music is loud and overstimulating, the sky littered with landmines that resemble trees, all while the giant, oppressive moon hovers in the distance. Everything about this area is overtly nightmarish, but we don't stay here for too long. Once again, the footage cuts to Bosch stealing from a cash register, losing karma in the process. Next to the cash register is a toolbox housing a key. Bosch also steals it. On the map marker, however, we can see that he is not alone. Moshing into yet another perspective, we see the player looting a corpse of their items. These items being an Apollo laser pistol, gas mask, and riot gear. The riot gear armor is the easiest to explain. It's a modified version of the NCR Ranger armor from the cover of the game. And the gas mask is just a renamed asset of the lobotomite gas mask from the Old World Blues DLC. But the Apollo laser pistol is not an asset found in any Fallout game. Instead, it was a weapon planned for Van Buren. Again, another Van Buren connection. That's not where the oddities end, however. The name of this corpse is username fetch_0. Username That implies that this was another person. Are we exploring multiple POVs after all? The room itself seems to be a tunnel leading somewhere, but again, POV switched too soon for us to keep track. Taken back to the city ruins, the video takes a minute to kick in before going upstairs and I think we found it. The Johnny guitar. God, we truly are in hell. Jokes aside, a massive and upscaled guitar that we can literally take, causing a mutilated torso to topple down at us, is just more instances of surreal imagery. Megalophobia has been an occurring theme throughout this series, as well as in Bosch's paintings themselves, so the abundance here absolutely checks out. Wandering around here leads to little more discovery, until we stumble upon a briefcase. Inside the briefcase is a chemistry set, along with a vial labeled Limit 115 Sample. This plays into another piece of the Fallout mythos that's way too long to explain in its entirety here, but I'll give the footnotes. Limit 115, or the New Plague, was a disease that swept the United States somewhere around the 2050s, about 27 years before the bombs dropped. By the name New Plague alone, you can tell that this was something incredibly viral and incredibly deadly. Something that even paved the way to the creation of the Forced Evolutionary Virus, or FEV. If you're unfamiliar with what FEV is, it's the virus that is responsible for a lot of the creatures you'll find in the wasteland. A common misconception I feel is shared in the Fallout world is that things like super mutants and deathclaws are the cause of radiation, but they're not. That's the work of FEV. And furthermore, Limit 115 isn't even a canon name for the New Plague. The only place where this sickness is labeled as Limit 115 is in a single line in text documents. Text documents for Van Buren. Next to the briefcase is another briefcase with a small ecosystem in it, one housing an extremely tiny NPCs simply named Man. Inside this briefcase are also two shacks and a radio tower. It's as if it's meant to mirror our own journey, either as a way for us to reflect, or as a way for the world to directly mock us. We don't stick around here long enough to get a definitive answer either way. We see a brief glimpse back at the lantern path from earlier, before being taken somewhere entirely new. A glowing, almost ethereal landscape. Our HUD once again is not present, and the architecture primarily resembles the town surrounding the Sierra Madre and the Dead Money DLC. Nothing seems to be here, and we switch perspectives once more. In this footage, we seem to be wandering around a much more consistent Mojave, despite being dark. This piece doesn't last for long, however, as we're transported back to the landmine dimension. In the background, some sort of distorted song can now be heard. Keep a footnote on this. We start to enter a church at the end of this path before switching back to the riot gear POV, heading down that tunnel. The trek down becomes more sinister once we start to spot giant skeletal compounds jutting from the crevices of this tunnel. The bottom oozing this cavalcade of mangled flesh, emitting a blood-red cloud in its presence. Even further down, sparks of lightning can be seen. The video ends with another shot of those lanterns, but this time it only lasts less than a second. This is probably the most dense episode we've covered since exploring. There is so much to go over that I haven't touched yet, but we still have 3 episodes to go. And some things need to be saved for the overall analysis, don't they? The first location we wake up to in this video is the bright Sierra Madre city. However, our stay here doesn't even last 30 seconds. Moving back to the ruined city that we've grown oh so accustomed to. Things are noticeable and a lot easier to see now than they were earlier. Maybe this is this place version of daytime? Enemies of some kind still reside here, as apparent by our map and the caution status coming back once more. Bosch makes his way through the interior pictures of several small dilapidated buildings before POV switch once again. Here, we can see him throwing the bodies of an NPC titled Last Man into a puddle. The same Last Man we saw a few episodes ago. There's a side room at the end of this tunnel that opens up to what looks like two rad roaches playing poker. Bosch decides to not investigate further and just leaves them be. Probably one of the very few encounters in these videos that's meant to intentionally be humorous. Down the tunnel further is a barrel on fire next to another dead NPC. This one having the name Daughter of Hecate. The Daughters of Hecate were a tribe planned for, you guessed it, Van Buren. So this is once again more cut content seeping its way into New Vegas. Later on, the Pip-Boy map even confirms to us this location is called Hecate's Sewers. Not far from that corpse is an NPC that is actually alive, once again only sporting the name Null. It seems to also just be a skeleton and doesn't really do anything. At the very least, it isn't hostile. Another room to the side of this tunnel complex has the body of another Last Man right at the entrance. In front of it sports a bottomless pit, and above it sports a really big door, if we decide to open the hatch. Even more Last Men fall into the abyss, many of them not making it all the way, all seeming to sport NCR-related armor as well. This nightmarish walk continues to the room ahead, giant corpse heads staring at you from under drains, a brain blocking our path at the end of a dark sewer tunnel, the thing spasming if hit, haunting audio cues playing out of nowhere. This blend of industrial with organic horror is something that really speaks to me specifically, and the way that it's pulled off down here has been haunting. Bosch finally makes his way to an exit out of these awful sewers. Doing so causes the perspective to shift back to the ruined city. We're greeted with what may be a pool. It's difficult to see. The water is basically Venta black. At the bottom of this water source, rocks with tribal graffiti on them can be found. Assets that are only found in the Honest Hearts DLC. The random occurrences of DLC-related textures here fits in well with the mishmash of other random assets we've run into thus far, and probably hints further that the game is literally falling apart. More strange assets can be found in the rubble, a crashed army truck lit ablaze next to what looks like to be a Ferris wheel, for example, or an Art Deco head with an oversized knife jutting into its skull. There's also what I believe to be the projector that takes you to the Old World Blues DLC in the rubble as well, still running. This entire part of the landscape feels like it's trying to reconnect with content actually featured in the base game, even if it's doing so in a really garbled sort of way. However, before we can investigate into this more, Bosch accidentally slips down a pit. Oopsie! This gives us a very convenient launchpad to once again switch perspectives. We're now atop of what is probably a watchtower, our radio picking up another disturbing frequency. Venturing further into the wastes yields a much more barren landscape. The only thing catching our immediate gaze is the ever-present moon, which I feel like is getting closer. Perspectives cut into this surrealist yard of spheres, some massive and some small. Some are even impossibly floating. In this storm stands what looks like to be a man in the entrance to a void doorframe. Inching closer reveals that this man is Ulysses? Or at least it's definitely using Ulysses as model. What the fuck are you doing here, dude? But much like most things in here, we don't get immediate answers, and the footage cuts to... Huh? Things are incredibly unsuspecting here. The landscape hasn't looked this peaceful since like 11 episodes ago at this point. Is this from earlier on in the playthrough? There is a myriad of ruins scattered around us, but the most suspecting of these is the satellite that is interactable in some way. But Bosch doesn't seem to do anything with it. When he opens the map, nothing actually seems to be around us, the map looking erased entirely. Heading up the mountain gives us a view of the wasteland from a completely different perspective. The light shines on the terrain below, making out several different and interesting landmarks. The serenading, almost heavenly sounding music during this scene adding to the moment. Though unfortunately, the peace doesn't last for long. There's plenty of details to dissect here before we move on to the second to last entry in the series, but I want to pay attention to two in particular. The easiest one to get out of the way is Bosch's reaction to the music kicking in at the end. He looks panicked, but if we look over to the enemy marker at the bottom left, it's more than just for the music. The other notable things about this strange sequence come in the form of the dates displayed on the Pip-Boy screen. I can't really discern a meaning out of the first string of numbers, but beside them sits a completely separate string that doesn't seem to be related to the date. The first is 1539, and at the very end, we can see it switches to 1552. If we were to go by the rest of the logic these videos have presented to us to think under, we can assume that these are meant to represent Bible verses. Specifically, 1 Corinthians 15:39 and 1 Corinthians 15:52. Not all flesh is the same. People have one kind of flesh, animals have another, birds another, and fish another. In a flash, in the twinkling of an eye at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. I'm not sure what the first can specifically correlate to, but organic tissue has been a common theme to invoke images of horror throughout most of the videos. As for the second, I believe it's the game subtly telling us that we were in danger. The last trumpet sounds, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. The dead have arisen to give chase to us. If this will carry over to the second to last episode is only up to be seen. The name of this entry is completely blank, the description simply reading, "This is 1 out of 2. We are at the true home stretch here." The video starts with the camera looking out into a desert storm, some sort of building or structure looming above us. Perspectives quickly shift back to the wastes. Things aren't as hellish as they have been out here, but we can see that whatever was encountered in the last video certainly did a number on us prior to this footage starting up. Night has fallen over the Mojave, or what I want to believe is the Mojave, and the surroundings are difficult to make out due to the low resolution of this installment. The moon that has been looming over the wastes still sits at its amplified state, albeit the atmosphere is a lot less intimidating with the red sky away. The player looks to be wandering in the vague direction of this assortment of dilapidated buildings in the distance. Nothing much else occupies the space around them, so perspectives shift. We arrive at a scene where our player character is on top of a crashed plane, the radio playing 2 separate frequencies in both of our ears. The landscape is made up of giant cranes in the sky, as well as a yard of red train carts on railroad tracks. But once we're able to find an interior titled Gypsum Quarry Office, we can piece together that this area is meant to be Gypsum Train Yard, an area that is inbounds, meaning this footage likely takes place inbounds. Going inside shifts perspectives elsewhere. This HUD-less POV is trapped in some dark, mechanical hellscape. The path ahead is barely visible, but we can absolutely hear the whirring of machinery chirp in the background. The footage shifts back to the player who entered into the quarry office, but as he leaves, we get another perspective. This one has had half of their health taken away, so likely the same as the one from the start of the video. At the bottom, it looks as if they are walking towards a map marker, the marker leading them to a location called Aerospace Laboratory. This location not appearing in New Vegas anywhere. Outside of this location stands a mannequin holding a bucket. Bosch just kind of rudely grabs it and throws it on the floor. The inside of the shack doesn't resemble anything of a laboratory at all, but there is a second floor. Heading further down greets us with a space that actually resembles more of a laboratory, as well as a skeleton named Jack P. This corpse is likely a reference to the real person Jack Parsons. Someone who, glancing over his Wikipedia, is so insanely interesting, but also had way too much ground to cover right here. Like, this guy was a rocket engineer who had ties to the occult and died via explosion in his home lab. One of the theories as to why this happened being because he was trying to create a fucking homunculus. Nobody watching this video is ever going to have a more interesting life than this. The important parts here are obviously his ties to aerospace and rocket engineering and the ties to the occult. But the dead ringer is absolutely the fact that his ashes were scattered in the Mojave Desert after his death. This is clearly meant to be a direct reference to him. One of the things that's found here is also a letter. A really short letter simply reading, "With love, RH." With Parsons' body dismembered and resting here for quite some time, is the implication here that RH, or alternatively, Robert House, was the one to have delivered the explosives to Parsons directly? This discovery seems to primarily serve as a reference and possibly the cause of what led to House getting investigated in the first place. We leave the shack and venture into the wastes before cutting into a different POV in the middle of looting things off an NPC labeled PLA soldier, a Chinese soldier. Lots of Chinese imagery in this episode particularly. I think the implication here is that they seized a lot more power in this alternate timeline to Fallout than they did in the main canon. The barracks of the place we're at are chilling. Corpses litter the path ahead, the occurrence seeming to be so common Bosch doesn't even bother inspecting most of them. Heading up the steps shows banners in the distance. I recognize this place from anywhere. We're at Caesar's camp. The Legion looks as if they've been entirely wiped out, and I don't mean recruiting Boone and going on a fun night kind of wiped out. I mean completely eviscerated. The tents leading to where you'd find Caesar are now littered with dirt pits marked with the Legion banner, mass graves for all of the Fumentari that lay dormant here. It really makes you think, what happened? Especially now that we seem to be in bounds again. What did we do? Next to this mountain shrouded in darkness, we find something a little unexpected. Another copy of trimorphic protenoia, along with another bag of acrylonitrile. Why are these items always paired with one another? The chemical, instead of healing you, now gives you the status -9999 intelligence for the next 16.7 hours. I feel like this is a much more accurate side effect to consuming a literal toxic chemical. Bosch picks up these items and moves on. One of these wooden tables that have been scattering the area sits with bread and wine. Bread isn't a foodstuff you can find in New Vegas, furthermore shown through the file image not being found. Its status effects are really good, however, giving you temporary addiction removal, restoring limb condition, curing poison, and HP regen of +89. This paired with the wine is clearly meant to invoke more religious imagery. The sound of church bells ring as these items are consumed. We switch perspectives again not long after this, following the POV of discovering Raul's shack. Raul is a ghoul you can meet in New Vegas that you're able to recruit as a companion, and he's probably the chillest out of all of them. Let's go inside and see if we can meet up with him. It would be really comforting to have a friendly face around here. Oh. Okay, yeah, no Raul, it looks like. The entry ends with us discovering a cave entrance to somewhere. The footage artifacting again right as the video ends. Which brings us to the final entry in this very eventful series. I present to you Cataly. Cataly is the Greek word for conclusion, just presented here with a C instead of a K. The title is deliberately telling us that this is the end. Things start on a more cinematic shot again. A spire of sorts is jutting out of the ground, the moon faintly in the background, looming over the horizon. The shot lingers a while before transitioning back into gameplay. We're back in the tunnels, or a sewer system of some sorts. The radio is once again playing different frequencies into both ears. Heading further up, we get confirmation that we're in a rail tunnel as red box carts reveal themselves to us. This tunnel eventually leads us to a corridor that our player detours into. As we pass by, we spot some graffiti decals on the walls, one of them reading "Let Go," the phrase that's typically associated with the Dead Money DLC, fitting as the tunnel transitions into a vertical version of the Sierra Madre's hotel rooms. Bosch doesn't decide to head down there, however, choosing to instead continue down the tunnel. The environment gradually becomes more hostile as descent progresses. Metal scaffolding and rebar jot out at almost every turn, making the path ahead more difficult to navigate. Eventually, an end to this tunnel is in sight, but there is one more room to the side that needs to be explored first. Opening the door takes us down a really long flight of stairs, into what looks like the entrance to the Brotherhood of Steel bunker. Before heading further down, to the side is another offering, an elite riot gear helmet. Above it, graffiti that reads, K Sarah Sarah. This is something really intriguing. K Sarah Sarah, or Whatever Will Be, is a song performed by the late Doris Day, and although never featuring in Fallout, would fit the time period. The song themes follow a woman pondering the future, and later on her children pondering the same question, the tender response to these questions simply being, K Sarah Sarah, whatever will be, will be. The theme here can be in reference to this being the final episode, that the conclusion of this series will be whatever it will be. But another anecdote is that this song is commonly used to create an effect of black comedy juxtaposed with dark or disastrous events. Or at least that's just what the Wikipedia article on the song states. The song does have a really hopeful tone to it, so its inclusion over an offering of one of the best armor pieces in the entire game certainly does feel intentional. Proceeding further with our new offering, perspectives shift to the outside. Caught in the midst of a sandstorm, standing atop of this graveyard of oversized vehicles. These things go on for a really long amount of distance, all having been lined up in a single file row. Several cuts happen while wandering continues in this general area, but nothing notable seems to appear in this time other than a marker at the bottom pointing to something discoverable slightly north of here. Before we see what that is, however, we're brought somewhere new yet again. This place is also really uncomfortable. The radio ambience buzzes as we make our way around these monoliths jutting out of the sand. Thankfully, we're not here for long. Switching back to the dark wastes, I start to realize something. We're in Nipton. You can make out the town hall building clear as day. We are unequivocally back in bounds, at least from this perspective. I finally get it. This is the timeline where you don't blow Oliver Swanwick into smithereens! The landscape here is clearly still heavily warped. The radio tower in the distance is obviously not present regularly, but neither is this giant skeleton resting atop a house either. The player heads west from Nipton, more radio towers littering the skyline. Tension continues to build out here before another cut takes us to the inside of the Vicky and Vance Casino in Prim. Again, another inbounds location. Leaving the casino to explore the Mojave Express building, also in Prim, shows us that the robot companion Eddie is also not sitting here. The desolation of this world doesn't just apply to the humans, it seems. This POV continues to head west. Another corruption shows us a glimpse of a landscape. This one doesn't look that noteworthy, just another ruined building in the midst of a sandstorm. Cutting back to the player footage, the HUD of our character is strangely missing. This has happened on a few occasions already, but this had to occur not long after that corruption, considering we're still in Prim, and that's pretty intriguing. The HUD returns once we start following another POV, this one heading east, as well as having some sort of weapon equipped. They discover a really strange landmark, a site labeled Anchorage Memorial, with a spike sticking out of the ground in the middle. The Anchorage Memorial is not a location in New Vegas, but rather one from Fallout 3. And not Van Buren Fallout 3, I mean the one that we all know. The spire in the middle is actually an oversized version of the Old Glory weapon, a weapon that is, again, associated with Ulysses. There's something about Ulysses that seems to have a very noteworthy importance throughout this entire journey, but the player doesn't stick around this memorial long enough to get any further details. Nearby is a shack as well, but a noise catches Bosch's interest before ever investigating further. Cautiously heading into the direction of the barking greets us with an oval-shaped obelisk in the sky. Getting too close to it causes it to disappear. Once this happens, another jump cut occurs, bringing us to a very familiar location. Goodsprings. Full circle, it seems. The town is as vacant as everywhere else. Landmarks like the Prospector Saloon and General Store are completely empty. Eventually, heading up the hill to Doc Mitchell's house, the spawn point of our entire journey in the Mojave. Before we can head inside, perspectives shift once more. The landscape is incredibly hostile and amplified once again, the atmosphere here switching from an angry and nightmarish red to a cold and desolate gray. But before we can get a full grasp of our surroundings, it hits us. The inside is filled with rubble and decay. Newspapers framed to the walls start to tell us more of the story. The first being of the Lucky 38's debut. Although this asset doesn't tell us much, it is one that is custom. Another talks about Robert House having been injured in a plane crash, another direct parallel to Howard Hughes, and likely why we found that photo of him in the spectrogram all the way back. This also means that we can probably infer that House is likely the pilot that we found the plane crash site all the way back at the very beginning of these videos. Another small mystery solved here. In the room with all the safes, there's objects scattered around the ground that look to resemble giant bombs. Inside the safe is a wide assortment of items, but none of them seem to be that important by now. To the left of it is an unedited picture of Howard Hughes. Inside one of these safes lies a ledger. This is marked as owned, so taking it counts as stealing. Reading it shows financial accounts that House seemingly sent to other companies as gifts. There's some recognizable names in here, such as Repcon and Vault-Tec, and even the Commonwealth Institute of Technology from Fallout 4. But the more you scroll, the more you start to realize Robco was paying off almost every single company involved in Fallout lore. The ledger ending off with this sentence. Through BR slush fund. Fuck this clown. Last transfer until further notice. A slush fund refers to a practice of bribery, essentially. You pay from this pool of money to forward an unofficial, often unethical, illegal payoff, typically used for personal or political gain. So I guess the question is, what did Mr. House need this slush fund for in the first place? By the ledger, we also spot a book read out exclusively in Roman numerals. These translate to 832. If we translate this over to a Bible verse, it brings us to Romans 8:32.
He that spared not of his own son, but delivered up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things?
Strolling further around shows us another paper of House finalizing a deal of some kind. Most of this is talking about the amping up tensions of the war, while a blurb at the top right talks about Robco being reinvigorated by a new government defense plan. Another interesting blurb here is at the bottom, mentioning that a member of the Fab Four is in critical condition after a car crash. This has been a really prevalent theme in the background, and we'll use its anecdotes later, so just keep it in mind. These newspapers are filled with so much rich detail that it would be difficult to cover all of what they're telling us. Just know that most of it is basically just confirming a lot of what we already knew. One of the non-newspaper related wall decals is actually a poster for Scarface if the Howard Hughes parallels weren't already enough for you. However, time for wandering has run up. Now, it's time. Before we can actually greet House and the Lucky 38, we're brought back one more time to Goodsprings. Inside of Doc Mitchell's house, we are missing our HUD entirely, crosshair and all. You can even hear Bosch hit the interact button and briefly bring out his signaling gun in confusion. The house is completely empty, apart from a door that was not present before. Opening it shows us a place that may be familiar. The void, guided by dim lanterns. A visual we only got brief glimpses of episodes ago seems to finally be getting a payoff. We walk further into this landscape, but the POV cuts back to the Lucky 38 one more time before we see the payoff. Up here, the man himself is awaiting us. We can't talk. The only thing we can do is listen. We deliver him the platinum chip, but I feel like that's of little use by now. After he talks to us, we peer around the corner to where his cryo room is, and we're brought back to the void. The end of the tunnel lies a white square. Walking through brings us to space. Everything is so bright. We can see what looks to be the Earth looming in the distance. Next to us sits a giant interactable bed, and our journey ends. I would make a comment about things fittingly ending on a crash, but I feel like it would be a little too cliché. At the very end of the video, we can see the forum Bosch had been posting to this entire time. Although very brief, there are many users who are responding to this thread at the time this video was taken. Here's what those users were saying.
I ask because I'm worried this'll be like a kill switch sort of situation, and we won't be able to see what else is in there after it poofs out of existence. Are you sure you have checked the entire drive, even the app data folder?
Yeah, nothing. absolutely nothing. It's just the data folder and the exe. I'll scoop around my drive some more, maybe download some tools or something. Just let me finish this recording.
Be careful with this spooky video game, Ghost Doctor. They might delete your System32 folder, or they'll travel to your toaster through the internet cables and set your kitchen on fire.
K4TZ, what are you doing here? Go back to your webcomic containment board. We are doing some real and serious work around here.
I don't know how beefy your rig is, but you could set up a sort of live stream of sorts so we can explore it together. We could make it a site-wide event even. Could DM a mod and get it set up.
Okay, I still think this shit is fake, but the live stream thing could be fun. I'm on board. I'm sure either Abacus or Slim Jim, when the lazy bastard is actually around to moderate shit, can do something epic with this.
It's honestly kinda nice to see this brief window of humanization for our protagonists, as well as the other observers who were there at the time. I feel like Bosch, after a while, gets any sort of non-diegetic personality stripped from him, and although that was definitely intentional and works in the story's favor, these little interactions here on the forum do help us remember the roots of these videos, and it was absolutely a fun payoff. But other than that, the story of Dr. Bosch has concluded itself. Although, when you take in all of the footnotes at face value, I'd imagine it's still difficult to piece together what exactly we just watched. The story calls towards many threads: UVB-76, the cancelled Fallout 3, alternate timelines in history, Gnosticism, Hell, and Hieronymus Bosch, but all of these things, when put together, feels really disconnected from one another, and makes things feel borderline nonsensical at times. To really understand what Dr. Bosch is trying to tell us, if there is even anything to understand, we need to categorize all of these core themes of this project and see if we can connect them to one another. Let's start with what I would consider the most pressing narrative inclusion. As all of you would know by now, ARG is an abbreviation for Alternate Reality Game. The observation that Dr. Bosch takes place in an alternate reality is obviously not much of a mystery. However, the interesting thing that's particularly exclusive to this project, unlike many other ARGs, is the alternate reality aspect takes center stage in the form of deliberately establishing it takes place in the world where events happen differently and diverge that of our existing timeline. Fallout Van Buren is something that progressively haunts the narrative of Dr. Bosch. It makes itself relevant by the second entry of these videos, and only progressively becomes more integral to understanding the themes of the project. There's subtle nods and build-up. One of my personal favorite examples was the Med-X name change we talked about like an entire hour prior. The climax to this conclusion comes much later in the 13th entry intro. This deliberately confirms to us that this version of New Vegas was developed and published by Black Isle and Interplay Studios, meaning that in this timeline, it's very likely that Bethesda purchasing the rights to Fallout never pans out, and that Obsidian was never contracted to make New Vegas because Obsidian would have never formed if Black Isle never disbanded. Though the interesting part about all this is that the game is still clearly called Fallout New Vegas, despite how different this version of the game seems to be. This does imply that even in this continuity, Van Buren was still cancelled and scrapped at some point. As for Bethesda's Fallout 3, the entire standing of that game is incredibly ambiguous, considering many Fallout 3 exclusive items make their way into this version of New Vegas, but if I had to guess, a full game set in the capital wasteland likely never came into existence in this timeline. The only way I can see that as a possibility is if this isn't actually an alternate reality and the game is simply tricking us in another weird spooky hell trick, but I have other anecdotes of evidence that make me dismiss this thought entirely. First off, we need to address the later video's sudden fascination with the Beatles. The Beatles, incidentally enough, are actually no stranger to many works of alternate history already, and are absolutely no stranger to conspiracy theories. A prominent example of this is the novel Once There Was a Way, going over an alternate scenario where the Beatles had stayed united for years after the date of their actual disbandment, much like the prospect of Interplay and Black Isle never disbanding. Nadir is where these parallels truly starts, but honestly you can even argue that they started in the previous episode, Salvaged. Remember the Son of Man painting we dissected from earlier? We went over a lot of its proposed meanings and symbolisms, but one piece of information I left out about it was talking about the green apple itself. This was a recurring motif found in Magritte's work, also having been prominently featured in the painting Legio de Mort. This painting was owned by none other than Paul McCartney, the painting having been the direct inspiration for the Beatles naming their record company Apple Corps. I'm unsure if this specifically was an intentional tie or just a convenient coincidence, but I can say with absolute certainty the other parallels we are about to discuss are completely intentional. Let me explain why. In that nightmare realm with the mines and the church, the same one present in the video's thumbnail, we hear a heavily distorted song playing throughout. The origin of this song is the Beatles song Sick to Death off of their album Everyday Chemistry, a song off an album that doesn't exist. Everyday Chemistry is one of the most fascinating fan projects I've stumbled across while doing research for this video. The footnotes is that a man by the name of James Richards passed out in the Del Puerto Canyon, an isolated patch of the Californian desert only slightly north of the Mojave. When he awoke, he found himself in another dimension. The most notable thing he noticed? The ketchup of this universe was purple. No, for some reason, this is like the only other oddity he decides to point out, but the real discovery was a lost Beatles album he smuggled back into our reality. Although this happened in 2009, this serves as a really major benchwork for the ARG format, and the project attached to it is something that is really well made and unanimously considered a really great piece of fan content. The finer details of this project are not really relevant to the rest of the story, but the fact that this story is literally about a man wandering into the Californian desert and finding himself in an alternate dimension is a very crucial point of contention. More Beatles references are made in the Untitled video, one of the radio frequencies tracing back to a 1969 WABC broadcast by the radio host Roby Yonge, discussing the Paul is dead theory. This is something you have probably heard of before. This is a music conspiracy up there with Courtney Love killing Kurt Cobain. The thesis of this theory is that after a lethal car crash, Paul McCartney had died on impact, and was replaced with a lookalike to spare overwhelming fan grief. A lot of the radio frequencies featured in these videos are really difficult to make out and are incredibly obscure. The source of this audio literally only has less than 800 views on YouTube, but I bring attention to this one because it's a footnote that comes back in the final episode. In Cataly, under one of the many newspapers we can read in the Lucky 38, we can just barely make out a headline reading that a member of the Fab Four are in critical condition after a car crash. As we already went over, this is the catalyst to the Paul is dead theory. The inclusion of this paper in a diegetic perspective also raises several other questions. The events of how this car crash happened having been altered fit into the narrative that Paul might actually be dead in this universe, which could also give credence to Everyday Chemistry having been a real album as well. Though the most interesting part about all this is the diegesis I mentioned previously. The radio broadcasts I can write off as not being something the player character is explicitly experiencing, but the paper, I can't so much. Fallout is obviously a world where culture stagnated in the 1950s. America was heavily insistent on making sure resistance and counterculture movements never arose in pre-war time, meaning something like the Beatles' psychedelic rock and hippie culture likely never came into existence. Though when it came to music specifically, Interplay and Black Isle were a lot more liberal with what they allowed to be canon. Like, you can make the argument that fucking Slipknot is canon in Interplay's Fallout lore because it was featured in the radio of that god-awful PS2 game. So, although Bethesda made a line in the sand of what music is allowed very explicit, it was different before then, so I could absolutely see the Beatles having been an important cultural cornerstone in this version of the Fallout timeline, much like how Elvis already is in our version of New Vegas. Whoever created the Dr. Bosch ARG is clearly extremely experienced with culture and just general art history, and I feel like that's something extremely rare for a creative of this kind of project. The references to the Beatles are only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to non-Fallout related evidence of an alternate universe. Another quick one is David Bowie's King of the City demo featuring in the video Back. Although this demo was discovered to exist in 2013, nobody in the public had ever actually heard it until 2022. Almost 50 years exactly after this demo was recorded. Under no plausible circumstance should this demo be something we would have been able to hear in 2012. These pieces of evidence are what make me believe that we are actually witnessing an alternate universe and not the game playing a facade in order to trick us. The parallels to James Richards and everyday chemistry make me believe we shifted into this dimension rather than starting off in it ourselves. Bosch is likely contacting members of the forum from this alternate dimension, giving proof of it, just as James Richards did with everyday chemistry. The oddities we witnessed in these videos are still outrageous, if not even more so in 2012 when these videos were being uploaded. And judging by the reactions of the people on the forum at the time, this is something completely unexpected and unexplainable, even for the reality that Dr. Bosch takes place in. This one aspect of the alternate reality theory I believe would be borderline safe to outright confirm. But this side really only covers the more meta aspect of the narrative. The change in timeline of our own reality has impacted Fallout itself drastically. And outside of the blatant nightmarish imagery and callbacks to cut content from Van Buren, there are other pieces of lore we can pick up to give us some sort of explanation as to what happened here. More explicitly, what did Mr. House do? I feel like if you're not a Fallout fan, the constant mentioning of this Mr. House character probably feels really confusing, so like, in the briefest terms possible, he's a billionaire oligarch and faction leader you can side with in New Vegas. He's actually the reason why the game's plot even starts in the first place, since you were tasked with delivering him a device known as the Platinum Chip, but the delivery gets intercepted at the very start of our journey. A big reason as to why New Vegas is in a much more functional state than the majority of other cities in Fallout's world is due to House's intervention as well, shooting down the majority of the bombs that were meant to hit Nevada before they landed. It's why the Lucky 38 still stands tall, even after 200-odd years since the collapse of civilization. Although, those favorable events don't seem to have played out the same in this continuity. Signs of divergence in this regard are shown to us as early as the episode Ground, where we find the Platinum Chip in this bunker, as well as its shipping ledger. This bunker also houses those terminals showing us the Vegas skyline with those airstreaks in the shot, directly showing us that the missiles weren't shot down in this timeline. Something that goes further to prove itself in the intro video, where the Lucky 38s and the rest of the Vegas skyline are noticeably absent from the main menu. The reasoning for this is sparsely hinted throughout the narrative. We know that Mr. House was injured in a plane crash at some point, as well as his company, Robco Industries, getting investigated at some point in time. The reasonings for this investigation are not entirely clear, but it does likely have to do with all the slush funds Robco was sending out at the time, and along with possibly being involved with the killing of Jack Parsons. I'm unsure about this one because this could also just be referring to L. Ron Hubbard. He was another person associated with Jack Parsons, and a lot of people believe that he was directly involved in his death. And of course, if this story couldn't get even more interesting, L. Ron Hubbard is also the fucking founder of Scientology. Anyways, to get back on track, the fall of House is a narrative point that starts off subtle, but becomes more overtly apparent by the end of these videos. For one, a lot of the time in the later half of these uploads is spent exploring a decimated and chaotic version of the Vegas landscape. Here we can see signs that the people of New Vegas also turned on House at one point or another, but I'm unsure if this turn of public perception happened before or after the bombs dropped. At the very end of Cataly, we actually do get to speak to the man himself very briefly. Now, this audio has supposedly been translated, and I'll read it off in a second. I tried to get the translated audio myself, and if I'm going to be honest, I do not hear what other people seem to be hearing, but this does seem to be the common consensus. Anyways.
I do wish you'd come met with me at the Lucky 38, cold, when you first arrived on this trip. Ironic how this turned out. The thousands of hours I spent calculating odds, running projections, planning for every contingency. You are the first person to step into the Lucky 38 in over 900,990 years. Before the Great War of 2077, I was the founder of Robco Industries, a vast computer and robotics corporation. I need you to, so filthy, manually upload the data from the chip usurped to the facility's primary computer. If you want to, please see the fate, please forgive me, of democracies, look out the windows. A Tartarus, bleak, unending.
All of these voice lines are spliced snippets of voice lines present in the base game, shifted around to make a different meaning. The garbled and almost nonsensical portions of this speech hint that House has likely been stuck here as some sort of purgatory, a bleak, unending Tartarus. This hell seems to be as much House's as our own, and that's the connecting thread between all of these mysteries that we still need to understand. Hell. Religious references are found all throughout Dr. Bosch's uploads. Beyond just the namesake of the channel, references to Gnostic texts are found at many times in these uploads. A Terminal houses the story, 3 versions of Judas by Luis Borges, the Terminal itself a seemingly infinite number of entries, many simply holding nonsense, likely also representing Borges' other short story, The Library of Babel. Direct parallels to Hieronymus Bosch's paintings are made very frequently, especially in later episodes. And when all of these things are placed with everything else, the hell motif feels out of place, while also being one of the most important threads to connecting everything together. If we are going to find a message or theme to dissect in this project, if there is one at all, it needs to be in here. And this entire time, there has been one piece of this thread that I've intentionally omitted. One that ties everything together. One that gives us our explanation. Mad God is a stop-motion film created by Phil Tippett for over 30 years, and it got its final release in 2022. I can find fewer words to describe this film other than extraordinary. In Tippett's own words, one of the goals behind this project was to bring Hieronymus Bosch's paintings to life while also giving it a modern lens. I'll try to spare this becoming just a Mad God review because although I can gush about this movie for hours, it would be more appropriate to look at it through what is important to connect it with everything else we've discussed. Mad God follows a protagonist known as the Assassin, a gas mask-clad soldier who descends to hell with a lantern and a briefcase. No dialogue is spoken by the Assassin or by any other character that appears in Mad God. It's later revealed that this suitcase the Assassin possesses holds a bomb. One-armed, likely with the intent of stopping the cycle of pain and misery that infinitely continues down here. Though the assassin's cycle always seems to get intercepted, making him just another part of this miserable and nihilistic Ouroboros just the same. This helps us connect so many threads left unanswered thus far. The beeping briefcase we find in the bunker, the garb that Bosch wears for the entirety of the series, the call to a figure known as the Last Man, a character that shows up in Mad God, who is supposedly the creator of the Assassins. The hell that the wasteland depicts is directly and explicitly mirroring the one that is found in Mad God. Obviously, these two things are meant to be incredibly bleak. Mad God is a film that seems to cover a lot of themes of warfare, especially post-nuclear warfare, and the looming dread weapons of mass destruction can hold on a population. Themes that are obviously mirrored in Fallout, but here are cranked up to their absolute extreme. Phil Tippett's depiction of Armageddon is directly mirrored here for the purpose of conveying a similar message. War is hell. In Mad God, the assassin is sent in with a deliberate goal in mind. The goal to destroy the cycle, put an end to everything, and in turn, hopefully put an end to the suffering mankind has to endure in this nightmare. However, with Dr. Bosch, it's not nearly as clear. The nuclear fallout of Fallout is absolutely amplified here in order to make a compelling and desolate hellscape even beyond the Mad God parallels. References to movies such as Apocalypse Now can also be found in the Untitled video, a movie that deals with the moral and psychological horrors of war. But Bosch, just like us, seems to be more motivated by finding any semblance of an answer to what is going on. It left me stumped in trying to come up with any meaning behind this project other than Dr. Bosch just wanted to flex their media palette on all of us and absolutely mock us with how cool their interests are. Ultimately, I believe Dr. Bosch is what you make of it. You are given a nihilistic, desolate, and cruel world. One that diverges that of our own and only houses pieces of a puzzle that don't seem to complete themselves. It feels dissatisfactory, but despite all that, throughout our entire venture down this channel, I can't help but feel a slight tinge of melancholic closure. Maybe I'm going to insert myself into this part a little more than necessary, but this is my interpretation of these videos. If this doesn't align with Bosch's vision or intentions, then I do apologize. Although, I think it is a testament to how well this entire project was crafted for the ability of multiple interpretations to even be discussed. I always feel like that's a pretty profound testament to art, and even somewhat mirrors the discussions behind Hieronymus Bosch's mysterious and elusive pieces to this day. That having been said, I think the underlying theme of Dr. Bosch's videos is one New Vegas fans may already be familiar with. Letting go. A contrasting theme that I left out of my brief Mad God analysis was one of an ideology that directly clashes with that of the Last Man. The prospect of rebuilding and potentially finding life and beauty in the hellscape we have found ourselves in. The ending of the film is incredibly strange, but one that can be interpreted as a reset. Not through destruction, but rather through rebirth. The fate of the wasteland at the end of Dr. Bosch is just as, if not more ambiguous than the ending of Mad God. We're brought to a space station, possibly the moon base from Van Buren, and we can see the world looking back at us. I've already gone through Van Buren's ghost being in all of these videos, but in a way, I think it's kind of reminiscent to how Black Isle and Interplay's version of Fallout kind of haunts the community to this day. It's no secret how divisive Fallout has become in the past decade. This one showing a world where Bethesda supposedly never acquired the rights, one where fans of the old canon could have potentially experienced things more to their liking, reads as a bit of a fantasy contrasted to everything we've witnessed. It reminds me of a lot of the themes that I covered in my Corrupted Nostalgia video about a year back. But instead of letting go of the past, the journey we endure reads to me as if it's telling you to let go of what could have been. There's really no telling what an alternate timeline where the development of Black Isle's Fallout 3 hitting completion would have looked like, whether it would have been better or worse for Fallout as a franchise. There is much to feel pessimistic when it comes to the state of this IP in current years. As I'm writing this, Season 2 of the Prime show is still airing new episodes, each one seeming to be more divisive than the last. And while I don't doubt there are plenty of valid and warranted criticisms that can be levied towards this IP at any given moment, I sure have plenty of my own. It can feel alienating at times. But silver linings always do exist, and a piece of fan content as complex and filled with love as this justifies all the more unsatisfactory aspects that would come to grow from this franchise I hold so much love and a passion for. If I know Dr. Bosch is anything, I know it's a project created by someone who loves Fallout. New Vegas is one of the most important games to have ever been released, and projects like this solidified that belief for me far more than any of the words that I have said here could. It's why the inclusion of the song K Sarah Sarah in the final episode really stood out to me. We can't change all the problems we wish we could, whether we're talking about something as major and reality-altering as nuclear Armageddon paranoia, or just simply taking full agency of our favorite IPs. In a time where human creativity feels like it's being challenged more than ever, uplifting projects as passionate and filled with as much care as this is really important, even if sometimes it takes 30 years for your vision to feel like it's been fully complete. I love Fallout, and I love this short collection of videos on YouTube. I'm guaranteed to have missed things in this coverage, and I'm sure you'll all be more than eager to point out how much I did. But this wasn't an attempt to solve Dr. Bosch. It was simply just a means for me to talk about and discuss something I am extremely passionate for and attach a message to it that I am equally passionate about. And I hope that has satisfied the few people who have stuck to this conclusion. So with that, I bid you adieu.